evening, Bitcoiners. RedTailHawk is with me, back on X again after some hiatuses. He's been banned several times, so we're all hoping he doesn't get banned again because we enjoy having him on the Bitcoin Army and elsewhere. He's a prolific reader, and he's authoring a book. He's a Bitcoiner, a mathematician, a mystic. He is working on a book titled What's in a Name? The Language of the Birds, which we are going to get into. What is in a name? A little backstory. In 2023, the seeds of a resolution to a years-long personal journey for him were planted by a 90-year-old Native American medicine man who gave him his name, RedTailHawk. He's continually been seeking to understand that experience, and it continually motivates his research, such as writing this book and many other adventures. He's like I mentioned, he's got, I don't know, well over 250 books, an avid reader. The book he's working on dives into the etymology of words, language itself being a riddle to be solved, inherent rabbit holes all over the place here, but they bridge both science and ancient and modern spiritual traditions, leading him to conclusions about the origin and science of baptism itself. We're going to get into that as well, which is interesting to hear about. His goal is to undermine religiously motivated violence, leading to a more just and peaceful world, and connecting to Bitcoin. Bitcoin helps in this process, connecting us towards a more just world of peace, promoting a perspective of unification, helping us all make sense of this as we awaken. So buckle up, friends. I can't wait to hear more about this interesting guest. RedTailHawk, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was imagining all the places we could start, because when I hear you talk, there are such a variety of areas that you just know a lot about and have studied, and how a lot of things connect. One thing that actually came up for me at work just recently, it was kind of random and interesting, but I have coworkers who hunt, and two of them, one of them brought it up. He likes to go elk hunting out where I live, out in the distant prairies and woods of Eastern Oregon. He's a bow hunter, so he's stealthy, quiet, has to get close, and he's hunted for decades, most of his life. And he was telling me about getting some new hunting clothing that had wires in it. He said it was like a Faraday cage. And I was like, what? And another hunter who I don't personally hunt. I mean, I have gone hunting, but and I appreciate the experience. I just, not in my nature. But another guy I work with who's also a hunter said, oh yeah, that stuff really works. We're talking about a Faraday cage in your clothes, and it works for them. Professionals are using it. And if you stop and think about it, you go, whoa, this connects now from an analog world that we're used to thinking about base reality to what is all that about? I thought I might start there because it helps some normie folks kind of think about something that stretches what we think of as what energy is and what we can see or experience. You want to go from there?
Sure. And I guess for this part of it, I'm going to put on a different hat.
Oh, there you go.
There's a
coonskin cap.
It's an actual coonskin cap. I watched your episode on Nick Malcolm, and Bring Facts gave me a shout out as well on there.
He shouts out right now.
Yep. Facts was with me when I popped this guy. It was a midnight varmint hunt. The night that, we had our 4th of July, I guess it was a couple days before 4th of July, but we had a fireworks show, and there was a raccoon that attacked his dad at their cabin. And so we suited up and rolled out there and got rid of the varmints, and I didn't want to let anything go to waste. So we went ahead and turned this into an actual coonskin cap. Facts told me, the first night I met him in person was at a bar out near his house, and he was telling me about Hex at that point in time, the human energy concealment suits, the Faraday cage lined clothing that you're talking about. And yeah, I mean, if you look up Hex on YouTube or whatever, you go to their website, they've got videos that hunters have submitted, like GoPro videos of the hunter he's got his bipod right there, and there's a mountain lion walking up to him like, what is this thing? Why isn't it colorful like it normally is?
Right.
It was noticing that, the human energy signature was not present, and it was used to that human energy signature. So it definitely works, and that was an important data point for me for part of my research was figuring out that the human energy signature, the aura, the spirit body, the subtle body, the energy body is electromagnetic in nature. And I
Yes.
mean, there's other data points that speak to this. But yeah, that was one of the first big data points that led me in that direction.
Hex, HECS, and focus on the emerging science about how animals use electromagnetic patterns to aid in their survival. I mean, it makes sense. It goes back to things about magnetism and migrations. We could speak to what is it, chronochrome or
Cryptochrome.
cryptochrome. Yeah,
Yep.
because I was talking to Anik Malcolm as well, and he had a musical group band called Cryptochrome. And at first I thought, oh, that just sounds cool, crypto. And he's like, oh, no, this is a thing. Animals use this. We have it in us, don't we?
Yes, it's generally latent. There are different designations like CRY2, CRY4. One version is for certain types of animals. Humans have a version. But yeah, actually, Nick was the first one who put cryptochrome on my radar.
Yeah. And and it just makes sense. So you imagine, okay, we've evolved. Let's just presume we share a background in science that we sort of understand as spanning a long period of time and evolution and whatever that may mean in detail. We're going to talk about the span of time and evolution. We've evolved these eyes, and animals from, you imagine the most whatever, the smallest microorganisms evolving into larger and larger things. They're using sensory perception in whatever that can be sorted out, whatever it is, in a many, many, many ways. And now here we are with our eyes that are honed in on a very narrow band of visible light that allows us to navigate the meat space that we understand to be like real today. As you know, now we already know that wavelength is a very narrow band in a vast band, which is to say, wavelengths that are in this dimension. Let's just call it this dimension. So we see light. Some animals can see infrared or ultraviolet stuff, so they see a little more or a little differently. Now, what's to say that beyond just those optics that we think are, that's how awareness works, is seeing. Well, what is that seeing for animals that migrate across the planet, for whales that may navigate the ocean? There's all these things here that science is now starting to show, whether, between things in the brain that can test and feel, experience magnetism stuff, the cryptochrome stuff. There are possibly things that we could even theoretically tap into ourselves that is, nascent in our ancient brains, but we've just sort of really fully adapted to this optical world. Do you have any sense of humans having these types of abilities or tapping into that at all?
Absolutely, and that ties into the origin story for my name.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we should go there. So let's start from the beginning. My beginning of my understanding of you is that at one point, let me just start with Bitcoin. You did find Bitcoin. It was during a period of your life when you were living fairly staunchly austere, I'll just say, experiencing what it means to where you sleep, where you eat, how you live as you work, and you're, I don't want to say on the edge and frame it in any way, but you're feeling what it's like to like remain functional and living. So you've felt that. And at that period of time, you're working, you find Bitcoin, your brain was just sort of ready for it. And that was long before you found your name. At which point, tell me how you met the person who got you in contact with the elder.
I was orange pilling a libertarian Discord server. And after, I don't know, a year, a little more, maybe 13, 14 months of, shared experience on that Discord server, a Native American woman who's a member there, had grown a sufficient amount of interest in me that she decided that she was going to reach out to her medicine man and request a remote encounter. So she set it up, and basically what I had to do was provide a picture of my left hand, just like this, like the Native American how greeting, fingers together and extended, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just from that, this medicine man was able to see things about me and give me a name. And he gave me the name RedTailHawk, and he said that I have a spirit that's always with me, a good spirit. He said I have two bad spirits that I need to purge, which is something that I've worked on over the course of time. They're just kind of like, boat rockers that are trying to, mess with me and get in my head and try to make me mad or whatever. So I basically took that experience and started off by trying to figure out what the name meant, right? Because you figure these names have some kind of a meaning. He didn't give the same type of name to one other guy who also had a similar experience that same day. The name that guy was given was Stoneface. So there's a pretty stark difference between Stoneface and RedTailHawk. And so I started looking up, and by the way, my friend, she had surgery like the next day. So she was totally out of commission, recovering, dealing with her surgery and stuff. So I didn't want to bother her and be like, what does this mean? What does this mean? So I started looking up what it meant. I watched probably half a dozen or more different YouTube videos, which turned out to be sort of a way that I would wind up doing a lot of my research, is by just trying to take advantage of the sort of book reports, if you will, that other people have already put out into the ether, and try and use those kind of like cell phone towers are used to triangulate location. Just, listen to what these different videos had to say and listen for the commonalities. And at a certain point, something popped, and it was that apparently people who are given this name or who have red-tailed hawks as a spirit animal or what have you tend to have an association with Kundalini awakenings. Now, back in 2018, I had kind of a crazy day in mid to early September. There was a hurricane getting ready to roll in on North Carolina, and a friend of mine was down there I loved very much, and she had just moved down there with her boyfriend the summer before that, in 2018. I went down there and visited them. We had a great time, and I actually was helping them sort of plan their bug out to get out of Dodge with that hurricane rolling in, because I'm a bit of a prepper type. And she was in a new city, starting a new chemistry PhD program. Her boyfriend was trying to get work. So they didn't really have a ton of time to sort of think about that stuff and plan it. But I was more than happy to offer them the benefit of my sort of prepper's brain. And so the morning that the hurricane was supposed to make landfall, their plan was for him to pick her up after she got out of a class. She was going to go to that class with a friend, and she had stayed with that friend to study the night before. Well, she called me up that morning. We'd already been texting that morning, and usually she wouldn't call me. We were, texting was our MO. So as soon as I saw her name flash across my caller ID, I'm like, uh-oh, something's wrong. And yeah, her boyfriend had died that morning.
Whoa.
She'd gotten a phone call from the police.
From
This
the
was
hurricane?
no, it was he had taken some pain pills because he was a laborer, and he had also had a few drinks, and it didn't go well.
Wow.
She had had another boyfriend of a similar length of time die in a similar way, and she was the one who found him. And so I knew that this was going to be a huge trigger for her. And at that point, I left work. I just walked out. I knew there was no way I was going to be able to focus on work because I knew that a hurricane was moving in on her position. And at this point, she had every reason in the world to be completely depressed and just, go walk out in the middle of Main Street and wait for a yield sign or a Volkswagen to wind up on top of her. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Vulnerable situation.
So I left, and I think I went over to her parents' house and found out that they were planning on meeting her at the hotel that they had arranged for her and her boyfriend. Um, she was, I'm in St. Louis. She's in Raleigh. There's no way that I was going to be able to fly there. No one's going to fly me into a hurricane. There's no way I had time to drive there. So as I was driving around looking for a place to just, relax and calm my nerves, I was crossing over an interstate highway on another highway. And I remember thinking to myself, dude, there's nothing you can do. You need to just right now get at peace with whatever the outcome is going to be. And that moment was a moment of unconditional love, honesty, and surrender to the machinations of the universe and to her free will. And it was going to be what it was going to be. And I needed to just get to be at peace with that. And moments after that thought flashed through my mind, I'm getting chills thinking about it right now. My whole body lit up with the most intense feeling of pins and needles that I've ever experienced in my entire life. And it went from, head to toe, fingertip to fingertip. And furthermore, my hands, I was unable to curl my fingers down to grasp the steering wheel of the truck I was driving. I had to sort of, just push my palms into the steering wheel and maintain a friction connection just to sort of steer. Fortunately, it was like 10:30 in the morning on a straightaway, so it wasn't like there was a ton of traffic or anything crazy that I had to contend with. But yeah, the Hindus refer to that as like an involuntary mudra. A
Mm.
hand position, is a mudra. Whatever. There's all sorts of different positions that are called mudras. I had no idea what was happening to me at the time. Frankly, I thought I was going to die. And as soon as it lasted maybe like 10 or 15 seconds. And then after it was done, I'm like, okay, I didn't die. I don't know what that was, but I'm going to yell at the sky now. What do you want from me? Right? Was basically, I leaned forward and screamed through my windshield at the sky. I guess I thought I was screaming at God, which is kind of funny because leading into that, I was an open-minded agnostic, but like leaning towards being a deist, right? The belief that there's something that's, some kind of a higher power. I'm hesitant to say what, but there's probably something out there that's a higher power than us on this
Sure.
planet here. So I think in that moment, I kind of somehow knew that this was some sort of a message of some sort. I just didn't know what it was. So I started looking up all sorts of stuff. I looked up, stories about enlightenment, Sadhguru, Adyashanti, Eckhart Tolle, etc., Rupert Spira. It didn't seem like it was an enlightenment experience based on their narratives. I eventually stumbled in my internet research on Kundalini. I looked at maybe one or two testimonial narratives about that. And being a mathematician, we're pretty particular about language and terms, defining our terms. And so the narrative testimonials that I read about Kundalini at that time were sufficiently different from what I experienced to the point where I initially and mistakenly wrote it off. So,
Because you
fast
didn't come
forward.
away from that with like, oh, this is what that means, or here's who I am now. It was just an awakening experience. Your chakras aligned. You had the feeling, and then you came away from that opened up, but not filled up. Just sort of like, okay, now what?
Yeah, I had no idea what it was that happened to me. I started looking. I went to the local Hindu temple. They kind of treated me like, sort of a white boy tourist. Like, get out of here. This is our space. Like, they were cool and nice enough, but like there was a coldness to the way that they interacted with me. And I'm not
Mm.
saying that's endemic of all. Obviously, I study the Hindu faith. I study all faith traditions now, but I also went to a local Mahayana Buddhist temple, and the venerable there was super warm and welcoming and took me in and sat down with me and, talked to me for probably better than an hour. I didn't necessarily get the answers that I sought from there, but I did start attending that place once a month to do like a guided meditation, followed by, a little bit of a lecture that she would give on Buddhism, which is cool because I was already into Wookiee Foot. And that's my favorite band. They draw from all sorts of different musical traditions and religious traditions, mystical, spiritual traditions. And I was into Alan Watts at one point. A cousin
Oh
of
yeah.
mine informed me that my perspective was super Zen. And I'm like, yo, I don't feel like a 70-year-old graybeard living on top of a mountain, but if you say so, I'll look into this Alan Watts guy. I looked him up and it was like, I'll be damned. That guy, he's saying things that like I think, he's saying things that I say. Okay, I see what you mean, cuz. So yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't until the medicine man encounter that I got sort of a second affirmation that I should look harder at this Kundalini awakening thing. And that's what I started looking into. And, after I learned about the chakras and the Kundalini serpent, which for anyone interested, Kundalini in Sanskrit just means coiled. If you're familiar with like the Greek tradition, they've got the Orphic egg that shows a serpent coiled around it. I'm pretty sure that the Greeks knew what the Hindus knew, that the Orphic egg was the Greek sort of metaphor analogy for the root chakra, and it has the Kundalini serpent coiled around it. When higher dormant chakras are activated, that serpent ceases to remain coiled around the root chakra, and it travels vertically up through what may be analogized as the spine of the spirit body. And I think that going back to like the cryptochrome and the electromagnetic nature of the spirit body of the aura, I think this serpentine component of the anatomy of the spirit body is also at least magnetic or electromagnetic. It's maybe some kind of a plasma in nature. And so when that is moving along the primary, electrical manifold of the body, the spine, just like the electromagnetic, effect, the right hand rule, right? If you've got current flowing into the screen here, there's going to be a magnetic field that's induced in the direction that your fingers are curling. If you do the hitchhiker's thumb, the thumb goes in the direction of the current, and the magnetic field is in the direction that the fingers are pointing.
Gotcha.
So you
Yeah.
would expect that, like, if you got shocked while you were playing with a light switch in your house or something, it's going to feel kind of like intense pins and needles. Likewise, that's what I think I experienced, was this serpent rising up through my spirit body's like spine, which is extremely close to my physical body's spine, which I think induces some kind of electrical activity that people who experience these Kundalini awakenings oftentimes report: heat, spiritual fire, the fiery baptism of the Holy Spirit, electric fire. There's all sorts of ways that people describe it, but all of those could be condensed down to this extreme sort of nervous system sensory experience. So I think that when I had my encounter with Medicine Man, he was able to essentially read my palm and read my aura, my spirit body, not by reading the creases in the flesh. I mean, sure, you could tell if I'm a pencil pusher or a manual laborer by, you know, looking at my hand, but that's like a Sherlock Holmes deductive reasoning thing. That's not
Right.
necessarily a mystical talent. Whereas unlocking magnetoreceptive or magnetosensitive vision is kind of a mystic talent, right? So
Hmm.
you think about medicine men and you think, okay, healer, traditional, you think psychedelic consumption, right? Well, I think that's how medicine man would do his diagnostics.
Hmm.
The other guy who got his name the same day through the same person um, was given essentially a non-medical. I guess it doesn't matter now because medicine man has passed. He can't get in trouble with the FDA. But he was given a prescription for some type of herb to help him with something. And this is not, you know, he's not alone in this. There's an author who went missing, I want to say sometime in the 90s, named Jacobo Grinberg, who wrote at least one book I've got. I think it's called The Shamans of Mexico. And one of the shamans that was focused upon in that book was named Pachita. And in that chapter, he talks about how Pachita could do basically like psychic surgeries, where she would basically use basically a hunting knife. And other than that, some type of psychic ability to render the patient mostly pain free. Like they didn't even have to use any anesthesia. She did like a lung transplant at one point on someone, and you say, okay, well, I can understand how she could cut someone open and get the lung out. I don't understand how she did this without anesthesia. And I don't understand how she got access to another lung and then installed it. She didn't need to. The lung manifested in the body, and then the body closed itself up. Another thing Grinberg talked about, which is related to medicine man in my experience, is that Pachita would read palms and she would be able to diagnose people with various afflictions of mind, body, or spirit from a distance, which to me speaks to her ability to see and read the aura, not just see it, but like know how to decipher what she's seeing. I mean, if you go to a Wookiee Foot show or any hippie jam band festival or anything like that, you're almost bound to run into someone who is, you know, going to say to you, "Oh, I can see your aura, man." Right?
Right.
Hippies definitely love their psychedelics, and LSD is one of them. And there was a 1998 study that was done. It was only 3 test participants, 3 test subjects, but the study went 3 for 3. So while it is a small sample size, 3 for 3, that's 1,000 batting average. You trot that rookie back out for another day at the plate if you're me. So I think, you know, this begs more research done on LSD if people need an excuse to do a little LSD research for
Right.
science. For science.
Well, I think the government's probably done their fair share over the decades. And who knows what they figured out or found out or used or buried or are using today. I can only imagine you probably studied that, but I can imagine that. So I'm thinking of a Kundalini awakening experience. It could come to you in your life at a time, a very specific time when things are aligned and you maybe you let go of your ego, or you're feeling a sense of purpose, or there's circumstances that like place you there and maybe you're ready and it happens like just naturally. Perhaps you can also put yourself there through meditation, the brain waves, there's the alpha, beta, and what theta zone you can get into. We'll get into that. So proper meditation, right mindfulness, maybe you can get there. Fasting, and hey, if you're just a normal pleb and maybe you kickstart it for half a day or a day or whatever with a dose. So there's maybe paths toward that experience.
Yeah. I mean, and mind you, everyone will, whether it's in this life or a subsequent life, experience this. It's how we graduate. The concept of enlightenment is essentially activation of all the dormant higher chakras, at least for those on the positive path. For those on the negative, the self-serving, the evil path, they'll skip over the heart chakra, but they still have a path to move forward. And this is how we graduate from the cycle of reincarnation and move on to what certain traditions might label as heaven or hell. If you are on the service to others polarity path, you will go with the people who are also on that path. If you are on this extreme service to self path, I say extreme because you have to take care of number one first and foremost. There's some amount of self-service that's baked into existence, but generally speaking, extreme service to the self would be 95+% of your choices, actions, thoughts, etc. are self-serving. They're going to go with all the other sort of self-service all-stars. And if we think that Earth is this dog eat dog world, oh brother, that place is dog eat dog on steroids. And they're not even just dogs anymore. They're all Cerberus. They're three-headed dogs, right? So that's I think what enlightenment is. It's a sort of a moment of graduation. And when a person achieves enlightenment and then dies their physical death, that's when they ascend to that next sort of realm. If we look at like near-death experiences, people oftentimes report being surrounded by love and light, typically unconditional love. If we look at, reports of angels or reports of encounters with like lowercase g gods and goddesses, they're oftentimes beings of light. You think about Ra being the sun god in Egypt, or Apollo, or all sorts of entities in some way, shape, or form had light associated with them. If you look at like UFO, UAP phenomena, there's oftentimes light anomalies and or physics anomalies associated with them. If you think about it, you're a being of matter and you're able to manipulate matter. Well, if you were a being of light living in a dimension of light, it stands to reason that you would be capable of manipulating light in the same way that, we can trick a baby or a dog by holding a sheet up in front of ourselves and make them think that we're not here anymore. So
Right.
too can these interdimensional aliens, which I think are basically angels or lowercase g gods and goddesses. These are ascended masters who were previously enlightened, who self-birthed a light body and then graduated. What they're trying to do is foster us to seek answers. I mean, if like basically every religious tradition teaches that on a long enough timeline, our path is to reunite with the one infinite creator. And believers from all traditions would probably not scoff at all at the idea that the creator is all wise and all knowing and all understanding, all powerful, all merciful, etc. So if we are to merge and unite with the creator at some point down the line, it stands to reason that we should seek answers and be curious and go learn a bunch of stuff and become more knowledgeable. So for them to randomly at times selectively reveal themselves to select people is it's a moment of mystery and wonder, and it's awe-inspiring, and it's paranormal. It's extraordinary. It breaks sort of the everyday mundanity and kind of puts people on their heels like, yo, what did I just experience? And it
Right.
forces people to start asking questions and doing research. And when people do that, they start learning things. And a non-zero percentage of those people find their way to deep, profound, spiritual, universal truths. And they wind up, activating those higher chakras, and they wind up graduating. And so the intended purpose of that revelatory experience manifested. It doesn't always necessarily work out, but I know people who have had UFO experiences that have completely changed their lives. Like it changed one person's career trajectory to the point where he went into the military to try to gain top secret clearances in order to try and find out what the government knew about this subject. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, it did for me, and that's how we met. Was that it was literally during my interview with Anik Malcolm, and he's working on his big project right now, the theory of everything. We had a great long meandering conversation, and that was one of the first ones I had where it kind of, instead of just being Bitcoin, 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 it was getting into art, and then we're getting into a little bit of stretching out into some of the paranormal, the metaphysical a little bit. And I told him my bit of story, and he said, you need to talk to RedTailHawk. And so I connected with you on Noster. I think it was a day later that Bring Facts said, "Dude, I know that guy," and I'm thinking like online or something. No, like he knows you. So anyway, suddenly connections were made. What you say brings me to so many thoughts. I have to write down so I don't forget rabbit holes, because this is a rabbit warren of rabbit holes, all of which I think connect. So okay, so on one point I had. And I brought it up before, I think. I don't know if to you, but there's this podcast, ongoing docu type series online, audio thing called the Telepathy Tapes. And I started going down a bit of that telepathy tape rabbit hole. And it starts out with autistic kids who just seem to like have these experiences disconnected from their bodies, but in their minds and spirit connected together on a hill, or can simply, it can start with they just kind of can see what's going on in the other room, or they always know what their mother's thinking or feeling, or they can actually, and then parsing into that, doing research, they can read stuff, and some of them can just do math, like math. We have to work math out, and they can just like have the answer. And then also beyond that, knowing like your palm reading, it's not about what we think of as like, well, the science would dictate this or that, and like you need to test it physically, whatever. And yet somehow from a distance, having not met somebody, having not like verbally or physically done anything interactive with them at all, they're tapping into a universal mind or a universal communication field. And when they're tapped in, it's not even a matter of them having to like work hard to look and find it. They just, like, their consciousness goes there and they have it. Well, I guess, have you heard of the telepathy tapes?
I have,
Okay.
and I think that a lot of these autistic children who exhibit these abilities are essentially what people might refer to as star seeds, as indigo children. The Law of One refers to them as wanderers. Dolores Cannon referred to them as volunteers. Basically, they are ascended masters from the other side who received the call that Earth was in trouble and needed to have the vibrations raised. And so the thing is from the other side, there's a non-interference doctrine. It's super bad karma to interfere with what we're doing down here. It's a lot like the Star Trek thing. I mean, Star Trek in some ways was art imitating life, as was
Yeah. The
Star
prime
Wars.
directive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that these beings are choosing to incarnate here, which is very similar to what Christ did. I think that's what Jesus Christ was, an entity from the other side who had previously achieved enlightenment in another life and wanted so very much to come to earth and teach us the ways of love, and basically incarnated and did exactly that. The thing is, it's a very risky move, because if one does not re-achieve enlightenment, then one gets swept back onto the wheel of reincarnation, and may get stuck in the reincarnation loop here for a while and have to endure many lifetimes of what Buddha referred to as suffering, right? So
Mm.
I think a lot of these beings are highly evolved and have what we would consider to be paranormal abilities. There was actually a TV show called Alphas, and there was an autistic character on that show named Gary, and he would do, like, a lot of times autistic kids have certain behavioral tics, like, you know, those move their hand or whatever in a certain way type of thing. Well, what Gary was doing when he would, you know, move his hand in a certain ways, he was tapping into electromagnetic signals, like radio signals, telecommunication signals. He could check out like security camera feeds. He could tap into police scanner signals, etc. And again, I have a feeling that that was art imitating life to some extent, that maybe a lot of these autistic kids are, you know, they're seers like
Mm.
Medicine Man, except maybe instead of needing to go through sort of a, and frankly, I can't say that Medicine Man didn't have his visual abilities from birth. I don't know. I actually never got to talk with him before he passed in September of 2025. And so I don't know, but I am pretty sure that certain psychedelic substances were part of his tradition and his world. So I'm thinking that he likely gained magnetoreceptive vision through the use of psychedelic substances. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way to have that ability. I can easily imagine that sort of highly evolved beings from the other side who choose to incarnate here could have that ability right out of the gate, and they might know just how to interpret everything that they're seeing, and they might be nonverbal because, you know, maybe they're projecting onto others their own abilities, and so they see verbal communications as unnecessary because they're able to, you know, see the thought forms that are sort of floating about a person's head, whereas maybe the rest of us normies are not able to do that right now.
It makes me think of that kind of universal consciousness thing. And I have other questions, but what do they call it? The Akashic records. I mean, going way back in history, there was like, you know, we hear humans study and do things and document things. And, you know, we had the great library of Alexandria and which burned. That's a whole nother topic. But so we collect wisdom and knowledge. But is it Tibetan or others? I can't remember. But the Akashic records, this sense that there's this universal knowledge or mind or maybe timeless thing that is there, and that when you can tap into it, you can like know things, and it spans lifetimes, past, present, future. Maybe it's math. OG asks a quick question about the human calculator. Is that a person?
That's me.
Oh, okay. I don't. You don't have to prove anything, but you're good. You're a mathematician, so.
One of my party tricks is a 3-digit multiplication. If you want, you pick a 3-digit number, I'll pick a 3-digit number. I'll multiply them in my head and really fast right now. I mean, hands up. I have no calculator. I'm operating.
I have
here.
A calculator. Party trick here.
Pick something hard that's not. It doesn't end in a 0 or something. You know, no zeros, no ones, no nines, that kind of thing.
Any 3-digit number?
Yeah. You pick one, I pick one.
Okay. 586.
All right, multiply 586 by 614. You should get 359,804.
There you go. You're tapped into the Akashic mathematical ledger. That's a good party trick, man. When Bring Facts mentioned that, I'm like, you know, I hate to embarrass somebody live, but there you go. So
I want to say it was Edgar Casey who, I don't know if he coined the term. I think he might have, but yeah, I worked with a lot of Indian students when I was a math teacher and critical thinking teacher, and I definitely had at least 2 or 3 whose name was Akash. So I'm pretty sure that Akashic record is kind of a Hindu, at least it's sort of based in Hindu nomenclature. As far as I understand it, it is the library of all lifetimes. And so when a person graduates to the other side, we have the ability to sort of check out lifetimes, like checking out books from a library. And in Dolores Cannon's material, they're called imprints. And basically, an imprint is it's just like living the original life. Like you're not the pioneer of that lifetime, but you experience all of the sensory stimuli, you experience all of the emotions. It's the ultimate way of walking the mile in the other person's shoes. And so, like, again, going back to the idea of ultimately reuniting with the creator, well, in order to get to that point where we are united with everything, it makes sense that we would start to first form little clusters of unity with others. And so, like, maybe on
Mm,
the other side, what happens is let's say you, me, and Fax, we all, and Nick, right? We all make our way over to the other side. We all achieve enlightenment. And once we're all over there, we're all boys. And, we're like, you know what? Let's form a social memory complex where I choose voluntarily to relive all of your lifetimes and all of Fax's lifetimes and all of our next lifetimes. And each of you all decide to do the same thing for the rest of us. And basically, at that point, where is the difference between us anymore? We've all lived all of one another's lifetimes. I has become a we. As we continue to progress, we learn more and more and we become more united. And I think that's kind of a stepping stone on the path back towards unity with the creator.
so one of my questions, it gets to that idea of the afterlife and that, near death experiences, NDEs. Connecting there, I had a thought earlier. I don't want to forget it. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or some people call it the Book of Life, you die, and there's a journey going on, but you get to a test where they take your heart out and weigh it against a feather, your heart and a feather. And if you were too light of heart and your heart's lighter than a feather, you don't pass. If you're heavy of heart, which I think probably most most people are heavy of heart, you don't pass. But if it's as light as a feather, it's just right, you pass into the afterlife, right?
My understanding, you're talking about the feather of Ma'at, M-A''A'-T, which
Maybe.
was, yeah, and that was done supposedly in the presence of Osiris, who is like Lord of the Underworld, which there's a whole bunch of symbolism in that that would need to be unpacked. But yeah, the feather of Ma'at, if your soul was lighter than the feather, then you had essentially achieved enlightenment. And you think
Okay.
about it's kind of weird that we refer to the opposite of heavy as our word for electromagnetic radiation, right?
Right. Interesting.
And it's also weird that within the word flight is the word light. So,
Right.
and then if you keep drilling down, you've got like going to red-tailed hawk, right? It's a raptor bird. Eagles, owls, falcons, these are raptor birds.
Wow.
And Ra and PT in raptor, it's PT is also found in Egypt itself. It's found in adept. It's found in baptism. It's found in all of these different words, and it means either sculptor or opener. So a raptor bird is either a sculptor of the light or an opener of the light. So yeah, I think essentially they were pointing out the same thing that like the Hindus or the Buddhists point out, that enlightenment is your path out of the reincarnation loop, and that's punching your ticket to the other side.
So you've got a light in your heart, and that's often a barrier when you're talking about aligned chakras. We might be light or aligned in our mind. We might be aligned in our body and our bowels, but that heart can be a hard one, perhaps.
It is. It requires unconditional universal love, which is basically loving everything with no expectation of return whatsoever. So in that moment when I was driving down the highway, it was unconditional love for that woman. And I don't think that my love for her was necessarily reciprocated. I mean, she appreciated me as a friend, but I don't know that she per se had love for me. And so it was unconditional love because it was not returned. And I'd been down that road with her more than once, and yet I still loved her. So it's not something that I could really just turn off. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
people can activate the heart chakra without activating the throat or the third eye. The crown chakra is already active. It sort of serves as a some indicator of the lower six. But yeah, one could activate just the heart and not activate the higher ones above that. That would be a person who maybe is extremely loving, but maybe has not accumulated the knowledge that they needed to accumulate, and maybe they haven't figured out the whole surrender thing. But yeah, like all of these traditions have various versions of these lessons in them. Like the surrender aspect is present in Christianity. People talk about like giving it to God, like let go and let God is a phrase that people
Yeah.
say. Even the very name of the Islamic religion, Islam, means submission, which is basically the same thing as surrender. It's submission to the will of Allah, of God. And so, like all of these traditions understand this. When you look at like the Greek tradition, they knew about it with gnosis, right? Like gnosis corresponds with the throat chakra, the wisdom chakra, knowledge. It,
Hmm.
all of these dots connect. It's really easy for me to get lost on tangents, just connecting dots.
There are parallels between all these faiths, if you call them that, or practices of the endeavor, I might call it. Jeeves says, opener of the light, we open up and there's light within. There's a light within us. Perhaps, people call it like your soul or your spirit. So connecting what I was thinking about the NDE and near-death experiences, more and more documented, people willing to share those, and I mean throughout time. But I guess I have a question about your thoughts on the NDE, where a lot of the stories are about how you die and there's the light. You go to the light. You might see loved ones. You go back through you play the tape, if you will. You review your life. There's a review. Now, different people have different experiences with it. Some like maybe bounce around or skip over parts, but there's a lot of core themes here. And that the review process itself isn't so much about, see, here's what you did and how you felt. It's about how others felt and experienced that from their perspective that as a human, didn't necessarily know or see, but it's like how you impacted all these, other people and things in your life. So there's a review, but then people basically feel like they connect with this divine or divinity or divine light. Maybe there's loved ones and others, and they all share that. But it kind of feels like a single like level. Like you die and you go back and you kind of debrief and calm down and heal up, rehabilitate, reconnect, learn again who you are, and then maybe you dip back in again for another round. But it feels like it's sort of, you could say like heaven, like it's that one place. What you talk about sometimes is that maybe there's levels to this. So like as spirits cycle or as people live a life, and maybe they circle in and out, I don't know. But they talk about, young souls, old souls that maybe through multiple experiences, here, there, and wherever, you strengthen, you grow wiser, you grow more loving, and it's like a process. And that maybe, is it all one place, all one Akashic record library, or is it sort of like levels of places you might be there, but you're not just like going to touch God? I don't know. What do you think?
So I think that the next sort of density or dimension or plane that we go to is, I like the word density to just to disambiguate it from, like, you know, axes of measurement used in dimensions, right? Width, length, and height. Density, it's a density of light, which, if you think about that from like a physics vantage point, as the closer we get to light speed, we know that time dilation is a thing. So those panoramic life reviews you were talking about, that happens in a flash, in a moment, right? Your life flashes before your eyes, right? People say
Right.
that is yet another indication of the idea that the other side is a density of light. I think that speaking to the idea of like old souls versus young souls, so when, for example, you're training a puppy dog, right? And you're giving that dog a place to eat. This is for you to eat. This is for you to drink. This is a place for you to sleep. This is your name, right? This is you know, a place for you to go to the bathroom outside or whatever. We, by interacting with us, we're self-aware creatures. We're actually helping give them a sense of self. And then in the training process, we're giving them choices, and choices are essentially what agency is interacting with, right? When you're an agent, you have agency, you have the ability to choose. So a lot of times what'll happen with a dog when it's being trained is it will imprint on the trainer. I'm pretty sure that what's going on in that moment is that the dog has just realized that it is a self. And the realization of selfhood is the spiritual accomplishment that is associated with activation of the solar plexus chakra. And so when a dormant higher chakra is activated, that Orphic egg, the serpent coiled around it, it travels up, right, to the height of whatever chakra is being activated. So if that's the case, and if the dogs are experiencing a similar sensory experience as what I described, like the intense pins and needles, they're going to take note of that. And all of a sudden, they might have sort of an inner dialogue going on that they've never experienced before. And all of a sudden, they're willingly, as a self, interacting with you, another self. And that's like mind-blowing. That's pioneering stuff for them. And so they're going to have a very, very deep and frankly sacred connection with that trainer, because this is the first other self that they've ever interacted with, as long as they have the knowledge of the self. So like if you go to the Genesis story of Adam and Eve, why is that serpent there? I don't think that that serpent was the devil. I think that, you know, Lucifer had a role to play in that story, but it wasn't as the serpent. The serpent was the Kundalini serpent, indicating that they had activated self-awareness. That's why they went and you know, covered their nakedness, is because all of a sudden they were aware of themselves. They were aware that they were naked. That's basically what was going on there. They weren't the first, you know, humans in the sense of like anthropologists would think of humans or whatever. Like they were the first self-aware humans.
Right. Wow. Going back into the biblical text, how do you read some of those stories? Like, so the Adam and Eve story, would you take that as fairly literal or metaphorical based on how do we tell that story from a standpoint that we are humans trying to understand the world, and that's the best we can do?
in the same way that the trainer is giving the dog choices, right? Sit, right? Well, you can either figure out that you're supposed to sit down or you can not. And if you sit down, you get a treat, and then you start to realize, oh, I like these treat things. I'm gonna do this. Oh, wait a minute, I'm a me, right? There's this realization that occurs. Well, what happened in the Garden of Eden was they were given a choice, just like the dog is being given a choice, and that being given that choice is what catalyzes the realization of selfhood and of agency. So I think that there are sort of symbols baked into these stories. I think that, if you've ever played a game of telephone growing up in school, some people call this game Chinese whispers. Daniel Prince taught me that term. You know for a fact that humans are kind of garbage when it comes to transmitting accurately
Being a witness
information.
on the stand. Yes.
Right. Yeah, and like just the chain of propagating information, there are weak links in the chain. People who don't understand what was being conveyed might still be conveying it to the next generation. These like forks and branches occur, and eventually things just become distorted, and they ultimately retain some core aspects. And in order to sort of get at the heart of these things, one must sort of read the philosophers with a grain of salt. The same thing is true with all of these, spiritual traditions, scriptures. Like there's gold to be mined in all of them, but there's baby and there's bathwater in every single tradition. Some maybe are better than others, but like I don't try to rank them, and I think that that's counterproductive. I think that divisive dogmatism is antithetical to the golden rule. The golden
Yeah.
rule is found in all of these traditions in slightly different language each time, but it's all pointing at the same general idea. My favorite articulation of it came from Rudolf Steiner, which Nick, he worked at a Steiner Waldorf school. He's
Right.
familiar with Steiner's teachings. I think Steiner was basically a Rosicrucian, which got rebranded to anthroposophy, but I don't think he even meant to give an articulation of the golden rule when he said this, but he basically said all one has to do is place oneself in the perspective of the other, right? So if I love Reese's peanut butter cups and think that would be the greatest gift that you could give me, maybe you're allergic to peanut butter, or maybe you are like a former sugar addict and that would be a horrible gift for you. So while for me that might be an amazing gift, I shouldn't give you that as a gift. I need to learn who you are, learn what makes you tick, what makes you, joyful, and give you a gift that is corresponding to that. I think that the golden rule existing in every tradition tells us at least two things. One, it's important. Two, humans suck at it. Because if we were doing a bang up job of abiding the golden rule, they wouldn't all need to teach it to us. That would be entirely redundant.
Right. Yeah. And we just never learn. We fall back on old habits, power and control, and all the things. There's so many temptations in the world, and that golden rule pervades all kinds of belief systems and faiths. And anthroposophy, that brings me, I think Jeeves might have mentioned this. Jeeves is listening. He says the serpent knew what he was doing. Speak for a moment about what you think of that. And I'm going to grab a book real quick.
Yeah, the serpent is essentially, okay, so people talk about dragons as guarding treasures, and dragons have fiery breath, and they're wise, and they have wings, and they kind of look like a snake with wings, if you think about it, even though they kind of have legs. Draco is where dragon derives from
Right.
etymologically, and Draco is basically just a giant snake. So the Kundalini serpent is in some ways analogized by this dragon myth that we have. And again, the fiery breath, I think that might have to do with the fire that is associated with the awakening process, that fire that's within. But in order to be able to breathe fire, you have to have fire within you. So there's fire within when you have this awakening experience. The dragon guards the treasure. Jason and the Argonauts. Jason had to defeat a dragon at Colchis in order to gain the golden fleece. That's the golden aura of light that is around the person. So yeah, the serpent definitely knows what the serpent is doing. It does not just hand out, activation of higher chakras unless you're on that correct wavelength. It's not something that people should necessarily pursue without sort of the right preparatory thoughts, the right state of mind, etc. If one experiences a Kundalini awakening up to and including full enlightenment without knowing what it is, it's very easy to go off the rails. In fact, Dr. Lee Sanella, MD, Sannella, he wrote a book called Kundalini Psychosis or Transcendence. People talk about the fine line between crazy and genius. This is it. In fact, as Fax has pointed out before, the word genius, and philologists and etymologists will disagree with me, but frankly, they are typically esoterically uninformed and only academically informed. They've only ever read their textbooks and seen what their professors have written on the chalkboard or what they've said in their lectures. But basically, the word genius derives from jinn, and jinn, at least in the Quran, is spelled Jinn, but in Egypt, which I think predates Islam significantly, and eventually Islam sort of conquered Egypt, and whenever conquering happens, there's a blending that occurs. And so I think Islam picked up the concept of jinn from the Egyptian culture. And again, in Egypt, they spelled it Djinn. That's not a pedantic nitpick. The DJ is how the serpent hieroglyph, the asp hieroglyph, is translated into English phonemes. And that serpent hieroglyph is indicative of Kundalini, of activation of that serpent. So you think about what words are potential derivatives etymologically from jinn. Well, the etymologists and philologists will definitely give me genie. They won't give me any of these other words, though, even though I call BS. It gives us genius, engineer, engine, ingenious, generate, gene, genetic, genuine. There's a lot of words there. And when people talk about activation of the wisdom chakra, of the throat chakra, they talk about, clear communication and speaking truth. Well, what is that if not genuine? And then you think about how, like, on the Kabbalah tree of life, there's the three columns, right? There's the left, the right, and then the center one. The center one it's not perfect one-to-one correspondence, but there is correspondence in that central column with the Hindu chakra system. And so at the very top is Kether. That corresponds to like the crown and the third eye sort of combined. And then below that, depending on which version of Kabbalah's tree of life you're looking at, you might see either a gap space, or you might see a sephira called Dath, D-A''ATH. There's three versions of the tree of life. There's the perfect, the imperfect, and the combined. If you're looking at the perfect or the combined, you'll see Dath on there, and Dath corresponds to the wisdom chakra. Dath translates to knowledge. And so when we're talking about like the Greek or the Christian Gnostic traditions,
this might be a different one.
I think that might be related, but that's not the one I'm thinking of.
Let me try to.
There's over on the left in those results with the circles, the sacred geometry, like the colorful one there. Yeah. So Dath is that gray one.
Let's see if we can find that. Sometimes you just want the picture. There we go.
Yep. So Dath translates to knowledge. And so basically that activation of the throat chakra is gnosis. And so you think about somebody who is extremely knowledgeable on things, and they are able typically to communicate very clearly. You know, you're an expert if you can talk at length about something without needing to resort to any reference materials and look things up. And typically, the more of an expert a person is on a subject, the greater and longer they're able to sort of wax poetically on that subject without referring to any reference materials. So I think all of that is in alignment with the idea of clear communication and sort of the activation of the throat chakra.
You're good at that. I am not. I wish I was. I'll have so many ideas and concepts and things in my head, but when it comes to communicating, I can't remember shit. I don't know if it's my age, but I feel like I've always kind of been that way where I had to go look it up and then I'm like, oh yeah, I know all this stuff, but I'm not a good translator of it all. And that's why I have you on. So, um, so in the books I went to run and grab, and this is jumping back a little bit, but Rudolf Steiner, I have these books on anthroposophy. What is anthroposophy? I had never heard of this until last year, and I had a coworker who grew up, of all places, but in South Africa and areas there, and was raised in a Waldorf school and with anthroposophy, and just knows this stuff. And I'm kind of like, huh, what is that? Some old like theory or whatever. It very much touches upon the spirit, the human spirit, expression, art, music, drama, and love. And but then also in when I was reading like just the very basics on what is anthroposophy, I was going like, okay, I'm just going to learn like logically what the thought processes are here. It gets right into what happens to you when you die. There were theories on that, knowing that process and what that means, and it was pretty specific. You know, granted, it's kind of rooted in some Christianity, but it parallels all these experiences that other people have, and you could hang your hat on Jesus or the Buddha or other leaders, but like Jeev mentions, you know, it's like there may be many paths going up this mountain, but at the top of the mountain, the view is the same. And that's kind of the feeling I get out of all that.
Totally agree. I call it, I don't have to, it was already called this, the perennial philosophy. Like perennial flowers, they just keep popping up, right? No matter where I look in all of these traditions, I keep finding the same major lessons in all of these traditions. So all of these traditions are, whether the dogmatists from those religions choose to acknowledge it or not, they are perennialist traditions. So I think, for example, you mentioned Jesus. You know, we have the birth narrative. We have a brief glimpse when he's about 12 years old in the temple when his parents lost him and had to go find him. And like, did you not know I would be about my father's work, right? And then fast forward 18 years and he's coming back riding on a donkey to Jerusalem. Where is all the missing chapters? Well, a lot of my research has shown that he traveled around and went and learned from the Druids and learned from the Egyptians and learned from the Brahmins and the Buddhists and spent a number of years, you know, just walking around, traveling. His relative was Joseph of Arimathea, who was basically like Elon Musk level wealthy. The guy was a tin magnate. He had sources of tin in the UK, so he knew the Druids. And from what I can gather, Jesus traveled around with him as a youth, oftentimes with Mary, and he would go learn from these various, you know, wise men and sages. According to Dolores Cannon's book, Jesus and the Essenes, Jesus and John the Baptist both studied with the Essenes, which they were like a sort of sect of mystical Jews who lived near the Dead Sea. And so, like, you think the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Right.
I'm pretty sure that those Dead Sea Scrolls were like a time capsule, but like an emergency jettison of a time capsule, because the Romans were in
Killing.
my, yeah, I think the Romans wanted to hijack both Judaism and Christianity to centralize them and take that authority for themselves, so that they could sort of, control things and whatnot. So that's why all roads lead to Rome. I mean, you've got Rome messed up Egypt, Rome messed up the Essenes, Rome messed up the Druids. They waged a war against them for quite a while. I think Alexander made his way as far east as Istanbul and Constantinople, and wasn't really able to make much further progress. They tried their damnedest to wipe the slate clean of Christ's travels. They didn't want any evidence left, but they couldn't quite wipe it all away, as like Nicholas Notovich's work and what is it, Yogi Abhedananda and Nicholas Roerich, all of them went to this monastery in India. I want to say it was the Himis monastery, and they found this scroll talking about the life of Saint Issa, and in the Quran, that's Jesus's name, basically, is Issa. It's if you think about Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail, the word of God, when he's got to step on the stepping stones and spell out the name of God, and he's like, okay, it's Jehovah, and he steps on the
Yeah,
J,
right.
and he nearly falls through, but in Latin or whatever, the J is an I. Well, Jesus, right? Issa. You can kind of hear
Uh,
the phonetic assonance between the two.
uh-huh.
So yeah, basically the thought process here is that Jesus was a perennialist. He went and practiced the golden rule by loving his neighbors around the world and hearing out what they had to say, learning their words, learning their ways.
Interesting. And you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't know if maybe it's a stretch to connect Issa to ISIS. I don't know if I'm just making that up. Anyway, it sounds similar, but um, not to distract, but the, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they find the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they did a couple of things where, one, they confirmed very, very accurately to the letter the transcription of books that we know. So we know that, okay, these books that we have in the Bible, lo and behold, the early editions of those are those texts. They also had other texts in there, and I don't know which all apocryphal books they had in there, but I think of like the apocryphal books, like there's the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary,
Book of
some of
Enoch.
those, Enoch, the book of Enoch. So there's these apocryphal texts that you can say, okay, I guess you can understand that, like the Catholic Church considers some of these to be pagan, offshoot, made up things that people came up with, but they're not really connected enough. And they left them out. They had these councils, many councils where they'd vet and clean and like, this is our story. The Council of Nicaea, they basically really said, we're drawing a hard line here. We're not including these books, some of which seem kind of pertinent. And at the same time, they left in Revelations and some other stuff. You'd say, well, but isn't that a little kooky? So like in the Gospel of Judas, the idea being that Judas was actually Jesus's closest buddy and asked Judas to turn him in for a purpose. And Judas didn't want to and said, well, okay. Jesus was like, if you love me, you will do this for me. And yes, it tarnishes your name and ruins you. And Judas did, like gave up all of himself. To this day, his name, Judas. But anyway, so the book of Judas, and then the Gospel of Mary, women having divinity. Maybe, I don't know, like what's that book and movie, the whole thing they did about Jesus and Mary,
Da Vinci Code.
No, Da Vinci Code. Yeah, Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
And so now she's castigated as like, oh, she was a whore or whatever. It's like, how about possibly one of the apostles or his romantic relationship, or I don't know. But anyway, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I guess, does that connect with what you were saying about things we know about the Bible and things we've lost?
Yeah. The first person to ever get a PhD on the subject of the Dead Sea Scrolls was Giza Vermes, Vermes, and he wrote something in his book that came out 40 years after the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and then he reiterated that same statement. He quoted himself in his second book, which he wrote 10 years later. Basically, what he said was that the Dead Sea Scrolls have given us for the first time an insight into like the creative sort of literary process behind the formation of Holy Scriptures, and it shows how, you know, the successors, like the rabbinic successors of the Pharisees, sort of collapsed Judaism down into this simple, easy, tidy, controllable unity.
Right.
So as Bitcoiners who are interested in things like decentralization and stuff, you can see how, you know, that would be perhaps something that would have interested Rome, if I'm right about the idea that Rome was, you know, they were hijackers of both Judaism and the Christ movement early on. You know, Rome waged war on the Jews from 66 to 70 AD. And I can't, you know, really say that the purpose of that war wasn't specifically to collapse that variegated Judaism, which had different sects and, you know, it was diverse, collapse that all down into that neat, tidy, easily controllable unity. Like you pointed out, the Council of Nicaea happened 300 years after Christ walked the earth. How far has America shifted in only 250 years? I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of distortion that can creep into a movement in just a few centuries. And so I just can't buy the idea. Like, to me, canonical is the same thing as fiat. It just means, well, because we said so. Well, who are
Right.
you?
By
Who are you to
decree.
say, right? Why do dudes wearing slick robes and hats 300 years after Christ walked the earth, why do they get to decide what is and what is not, you know, viable material for seekers to, you know, find communion with God? Like, I'm not going to abide that. No, thank you. I was raised that way. But at a certain point, it just seemed a little bit too culty to me. And I couldn't explain a lot of stuff. And frankly, like not eating meat on Fridays in Lent, like, what is that? I think Jesus cared more about what comes out of our mouths than what goes into our mouths.
Right.
Like,
There's
so
definitely a lot of control structures that like keep you busy, have it, you know, don't seek it yourself, go through the hierarchical ministry. And not to say that people, I mean, it can be a conduit for religious experience. Religion can also short circuit spiritual experience because you get caught in the trappings. It does bring people towards something and people can experience all that. It also can kind of keep it caged, you know. It's like, because if something, say you had a kundalini experience and you go through who you're seeking for guidance about that, and they're going to put a framework on it that it means sort of just this and that or whatever, go come back into this and keep on this path, versus say something very different than perhaps humans can completely understand necessarily. You know, I don't know. The Council of Nicaea, Jeeves knows about this one. A purging event. Yes, that's what I'd read about it. The old esoteric knowledge was lost in some sense. We could also refer to the library of
Alexandria, yeah.
Alexandria. Yes, imagine the knowledge there that was lost. The very fact we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, that itself is a gift to humanity. But I'm just imagining the circumstances and that time frame, thousands of years ago, where the circumstances that led up to people caching those scrolls and in copper and paper and in volume, what heady times they must have been under, plus the knowledge we had in the Library of Alexandria lost, and who knows what we lost. I mean, it's insane to think about events that happened, and you could imagine power structures that were, well, wanting to stay in control, I suppose.
And we didn't just lose the libraries, we lost a lot of librarians. You know, you think about how early Christians were persecuted in Rome, and, you know, they were forced to go into the Colosseum, and, you know, they were fed to lions and whatnot. I mean, you got to figure that if I'm right, if Rome, if their goal was to hijack Christianity and use it as a control mechanism for the population, then one of the things that they would have had to do initially is get rid of the legitimate competition by, you know, persecuting sort of the best adepts, the best acolytes, the most prominent Christian teachers who came after Christ, who really got it, you know, and get rid of them. And then, you know, let some time pass, play the long game, know that, you know, you're not necessarily going to get checkmate during your reign as a Roman hegemon, but you're going to pass that football off to the next guy, to the next guy, to the next guy. And eventually Rome is going to come out on top because it's an infinite game and they can coordinate from ruler to ruler like that. So, yeah,
Like
I think.
we edify Jesus, but just imagine if another Jesus popped up, he doesn't fit, you know. So it oh man, I have so many thoughts. But so then getting to your etymology and raptor, ra, and the PT, you have ideas about, and we're talking about religion and spiritual experiences, baptism, ba, and PT. What have you uncovered about what are your ideas about baptism? And I know it's a big thing and it's not just the words, but there's connections there and something bigger. Tell me about baptism.
All right. Well, earlier I mentioned Dr. Lee Sanella, MD's book, Kundalini, Psychosis or Transcendence.
Yeah.
In the appendix of that book was written by a brilliant man, Itzhak Bentov, who was born in 1923. He didn't have any college, so he's like Goodwill Hunting full send. And he developed the first rocket system that was ever used by the Israelis in their war for independence in the 1940s. He had multiple patents. He eventually wrote a book that was released in 1977 called Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Mechanics of Consciousness. In the appendix of that book, he described his physio-kundalini model. And in that appendix, he talked about how transcranial magnetic stimulation, so you use magnets and, you know, stimulate across the cranium, the brain, using magnetic pulses. And he found that with frequencies of, like, for example, 4 or 7 hertz, you could actually trigger a spiritual awakening. So I noticed that Dr. Joe Dispenza has focused a lot on neural oscillation patterns, and he sees the value in theta brainwaves. What essentially I think is going on, like, you think about people saying on social media, you got to go outside and touch grass, right? That's another way of saying what hippies talk about with grounding. And if you think about how Buddhists and Hindus will meditate in the lotus position with the root chakra in direct contact with the earth, what's going on there, according to Bentov, is the mind, body, and spirit are being rhythm entrained to the Schumann resonance, which is the natural resonant frequency of the earth. It's related to lightning strikes. And basically, you can calculate the Schumann resonance frequency by calculating the speed of light. How fast would it take a light particle to bounce around the earth, bouncing from the ionosphere back down to the earth, back up to the ionosphere, back down to the earth again, sort of making like a radiant pattern around it. So the Schumann resonance is a high band of theta frequency. Theta is between 4 and 8 hertz, and the Schumann resonance is around 7.5 hertz. Geologists use 7.5 hertz as a baseline for when they're taking, subterranean readings. So basically,
Interesting.
what I figured out is that theta waves are generated in the mind through what's called the frequency following response. Bentov wrote about this. It was talked about in the remote viewing, the CIA literature, the gateway experience.
Right.
Bentov was quoted more often than Robert Monroe was. And the Monroe Institute is like the premier, institution for remote viewing in the public sector, or in the private sector rather.
In
So,
astral projection, all that.
right. And by the way, Bentov died in American Airlines Flight 191 2 years after he released his book. And then 4 years after that, he was the most heavily cited figure in the Gateway experience, which the documentation for that at the time was classified. So we're talking about paranormal espionage techniques. I don't think that Flight 191 was an accident. I think that it was intentionally sabotaged to take Bentov out. They took out over 270 people in order to maintain operational security on this research and sort of silence him. So
I have to
one thing
refresh my memory on Flight 191, 1979.
took off from
Um,
O'Hare Airport, and basically what they found out was that a forklift had like pinched the connection point for one of the engines, and right after takeoff the engine just started flopping around on the thing, and the flight crashed minutes after it took off in the nearby Chicago suburb of Des Plaines.
No mechanical discrepancies were noted the day before the accident.
And then a guy who was apparently in charge of maintenance procedures at O'Hare but never touched that flight and lived in Oklahoma, unalived himself, which to me seems like, the same people who pinched with the forklift the engine and caused it to malfunction and caused the crash needed to create some type of a scapegoat. And so they probably went and unalived this other guy who had no reason whatsoever. Like, okay, so you're in charge of the maintenance procedures at the facility, but you didn't have anything specific to do with that flight. You never touched that plane. I don't know. It just seems fishy to me that somebody who was completely, he never touched that plane whatsoever would,
Unalive himself.
yes.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure that there was some, military or intelligence operation going on here, because like I said, later on, 4 years later, he was the most heavily cited person in that material. So another thing that can cause theta neural oscillations is sensory deprivation.
Mm-hmm.
There are modern studies that show that theta neural oscillations are induced by sensory deprivation experiences. There are other studies that show that sensory deprivation, experiencers often experience weird visuals. Earlier, I mentioned Dolores Cannon, and she was like a pioneer for past life regression hypnotherapy. Hypnosis subjects are put into theta neural oscillation pattern states. Also, the University of Virginia, Dr. Ian Stevenson pioneered a research program in their medical school's division of perceptual studies. And so they studied like near-death experiences and whatnot, but they mostly focused on reincarnation case studies. And what they found was that all of their case studies were children between the ages of about 2 and like 7 or 8 years old. And there are modern studies that'll show you that children between the ages of like 2 or 3 and 7 or 8 years old are naturally in a theta dominant neural oscillation state. which makes a lot of sense because that state is a rapid learning state. It's the period of life in which we need to get up to speed on how we live here now. So from a survival vantage point, that's very important. Rudolf Steiner broke the education process into 3 7-year groupings. So that even aligns with it. I think, I forget who it was. Daniel always quotes this one. It was Aristotle or Plato or someone said, show me the boy by age 7 and I'll tell you the man, or something like that.
Right.
So if you look at all that's saying, okay, theta is important, guys. Well, if you think about
Like
Bentov's work,
kids are just on and taking it in. They don't have their filters built up, and they're just here now, basically, all the time. And so kids, I mean, you hear about kids who, when they're young, they have all these, like, these memories or these knowledges and these, like, sort of, you might say, the special kids. And then they get older, and sometimes that stuff fades, or you no longer see that imaginary friend anymore, do you? So
right? And it's the kids are typically, relaying lives that are pretty mundane and boring. I mean, they're not usually saying, "Oh yeah, I was Marie Antoinette, or I was Cleopatra, or I was, Lao Tzu, or anything cool like that." I mean, it's usually some random pleb who lived a couple of villages away or something. And they had thousands of case studies. The evidence was very compelling. It's worth looking into. That these people oftentimes had birthmarks or birth defects that lined up oftentimes with wounds or medical scars, or sometimes just marks that they had on their bodies in the previous life. And so Dr. Stevenson and the doctor to whom he handed the keys to the caddy to when he retired, Dr. Jim Tucker, who retired at the beginning of 2025, they found thousands of case studies where they did not have a better explanation other than reincarnation. So you take all of that and you say, okay, theta waves seem to be important. Then when I was looking into, like, the subject of lost civilizations, not Atlantis, actually, I was looking into the lost civilization of Mu. James Churchward did a lot of work on that, like 150 years ago. This dude was full Indiana Jones. He was boots on the ground. He went everywhere, looked at all of these, monuments all over the place. And on one of the pages in his first book, he talks about how the Egyptians were a reflex of the Mayans. And so you could get a lot of the sort of original ceremonies by studying both of these cultures. He pointed out how I don't know where he got this from, but the Egyptians would place adepts into sarcophagi, and the adept would come out of the sarcophagus with a reminder that when this life ended, another life awaited them. So what could a person do in a sarcophagus that would give them an increased conviction in the doctrine of reincarnation? Well, it stands to reason that they would have experienced some past life memories. Well, if past life memories are accessible due to the stimulation of theta neural oscillations, then maybe they were using sarcophagi as sensory deprivation tanks. And when I had that thought, I was like, well, wait a minute. What if they were using these sarcophagi as baptismal fonts? I started thinking about, baptism and breaking that out.
I
So
forgot we were talking about baptism. we're getting there.
yeah, so baptism breaks into ba and pata. We talked about pata earlier as meaning opener or sculptor. I am prone to think, given the relationship between Greece and Egypt, there's a lot of esoteric correspondence across the pond there between those two cultures. And like, for example, Hecate, the goddess of like, I think witchcraft and magic, and she was heavily related to serpents. Well, Heka is the word for magic in Egypt. So that, I
Oh.
mean, well, in basically all of these various traditions, there is a Holy Trinity. We know the Christian version of the Holy Trinity is God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus Christ, right? Well, in Egypt, I mentioned Osiris, you mentioned Isis. Osiris, Isis, and Horus is an expression of the Holy Trinity. In Greece, there is an expression of it that involves three letters: chi, rho, and phi. Basically, what I've boiled this down to is that the three components of the Holy Trinity in all traditions are expressions of what is called the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and the divine child, or a child of God, or like in the case of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So basically, the divine masculine refers to sort of the higher self, which is our connection to the higher self, sort of your guardian angel, maybe your subconscious, although I think maybe the word superconscious might be more appropriate since it's above us.
Mhm.
The connection to that is through the crown chakra. So the divine masculine is associated with the crown chakra. The divine feminine is the serpent that is coiled around the root chakra, the spark of the divine that's within us all. And when you experience a Kundalini awakening to full enlightenment, that serpent is going from its coiled location around the root chakra, and it's extending itself upwards. It's reuniting with the divine masculine. And what happens when masculine and feminine unite? You have a child. So within each of us is the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Our goal is to embody each of these things. Now, what does that mean? Well, in the tradition of Kabbalah, which I also believe was Egyptian long before Moses brought it to the Hebrew tradition,
Mm.
that tree of life that we showed earlier,
Right.
it had the central column, but it also had the two columns on the wings, and those wing columns contain divine traits. So yeah, on the red one at the top left is understanding, and on the top right, that black one is wisdom, and that's a masculine trait, is wisdom, because wisdom penetrates foolishness, whereas understanding is predicated upon receiving information, right?
Mm.
The next rung down on the ladder, on the right side is mercy, the blue, and on the left side, the red one, is power or severity. Well, power or severity is masculine because it penetrates resistance. Mercy is feminine because it is accepting of what has already transpired. The next
Mm.
rung below that, you've got on the left, the orange one, Hod. That's basically glory or splendor. That's feminine. You take in the glory, right? That's glory is taken in, it's received. On the other side, the purple one is Netzach. That's victory. Victory, you think about, winning a game, a sports game, or something like winning a race. You
Yeah.
penetrate the finish line, you penetrate the goal line. So the divine masculine doesn't just, apply to the higher self. It's also a set of divine traits that one can embody more or less. Likewise, the divine feminine isn't just the serpent that's coiled around the root chakra, an element of the actual spirit body. It corresponds to divine traits that are, generally speaking, receptive. And so when one embodies all of these traits in a balanced way, that's basically how we climb the tree of life towards the top there, which Kether, that's, all of the descriptions of Kether are about light. It's basically enlightenment. And again, below that is Gnosis, the Doth, the gray one. Below that is the heart chakra, Tifereth. The lower three chakras are represented by the two lower ones at the bottom, Yesod and Malkuth. So yeah, basically in the word Kabbalah and also in the Merkabah, we talked about the Da Vinci Code earlier. That's something that they got right, was talking about the Merkabah, which is basically like a 3D version of the Star of David. It's got two triangles. One is pointing upwards, one is pointing downwards. The upwards pointing triangle resembles the tip of a spear or a sword, which is penetrative. There's your divine masculine reference. The lower one, the downward pointing triangle, is basically a receptacle, like a chalice, like a vase. And so that's receptive, right? So the Merkabah is pointing at the same things that Kabbalah is pointing to. Now, in both of those words are Ka and Ba, right? Earlier I mentioned Chi, Rho, and Phi. There's yin and there's yang. There's alpha and there's omega. All of these are expressions of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. In the Hebrew alphabet, it's Aleph and Teth. In the Arabic alphabet, it's Aleph and Ba. So if Ba in the Arabic
Ba.
alphabet, yeah.
There we go.
If we're treating this like a system of algebraic equations to be solved, we've got Ba already as the divine feminine in the Arabic alphabet. So transferring that to Kabbalah and Merkabah, you've got Ka as the divine masculine and Ba as the divine feminine. So in baptism, you've got Ba in there. So, and then PT means basically opener. So again, jumping over the pond to Greece, you've got the egg, the Orphic egg. What do you do to an egg? You open it. And when you open it, Phanes comes out. Phanes was this golden glittering bird with wings, and it's all related to light and everything. So essentially, Bapta is talking about opening the root chakra and opening the Ba, getting the serpent to rise up through the spirit body and activate higher chakras. So if that's true, what were the Egyptians using for sensory deprivation fluid? That was my next question. Okay, so we've got the sarcophagi that could totally work as a sensory deprivation tank. It's human sized, it's reasonably tailored to the size of a human, so you wouldn't need a ton of sensory deprivation fluid. But
And they're
everyone,
empty. It's not like they're full of dead people. They find sarcophagi
yeah,
that are just boxes.
I don't believe that they've ever found a mummified body in a sarcophagus, at least not in a pyramid. And I think AJ from the Y Files recently did an interview with Tucker Carlson and pointed that out. Tucker was under the impression that they had found bodies in them, but no, they haven't. So these were not meant to be used as burial vessels. The reason that people think that is because of Doth. Doth sounds a whole lot like death, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And frankly, that's where the misconception about Merkabah came from, that gave us the word macabre. Merkabah, macabre, death, doth. You can hear the phonetic assonance between these words. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about our history due to people being esoterically uninformed. So if you look at modern sensory deprivation as a practice, we use Epsom salts, which everyone knows were discovered in Epsom, England about 400 years ago. There's a researcher, his handle on X and on YouTube is The Land of Chem, CHEM. And this is just a dude like me who got bit by the 2012, Mayan calendar bug. He started looking into the Anunnaki and all sorts of, cool stuff that we probably all have interest in. Yeah, Jeffrey Drum is his name. And he actually wound up moving to Cairo in order to, do his research full time. And his work demonstrates that various Egyptian buildings were used for the manufacturing of select chemicals. And I found him through the YouTube channel Demystify Sci. They interviewed him, and I think that was like, if not his only interview at the time, it was one of a small number of interviews that he had given. And he laid it all out. I'd been looking for someone who was an expert on the chemical manufacturing capabilities of the ancient Egyptians. I just didn't know where to look, and boom, they had already had a conversation with him about this. The reason that I was looking for this is because I was coming at this from, this baptism, this etymological perspective. I'm thinking to myself, okay, baptism, bath, basin. What about basalt? And I looked it up. I'm like, could basalt be processed into magnesium sulfate? And I'm not going to lie, chemistry, geology, these are not my wheelhouse subjects. So, I went to Google and I typed it in, and, I got my AI search results. And, I would think that AI is going to be pretty correct about something as simple as converting basalt with chemicals into magnesium sulfate. It said it was possible, but the chemicals that you would need were things like, there were multiple chemicals listed, but they would have been acids. And among the acids that were listed were hydrochloric acid and sulfuric acid. Well, as it turns out, Drum's research suggests that in the central pyramid, they were manufacturing hydrochloric acid. And in the Great Pyramid, they were manufacturing sulfuric acid. So boom, there you go. The Egyptians had the capabilities to manufacture the chemicals that would have been necessary to produce Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate. You think about the word basalt.
Oh, huh.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why I started looking down that path. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's what they were doing. They were doing sensory deprivation in the Queen's Chamber sarcophagus specifically for activation of higher chakras. The King's Chamber sarcophagus was used for similar purposes, but the resonance profile of the sort of, the pyramids is different in different locations in that structure. If I can back up for a second, atoms have electrons orbiting the nuclei. And when, we talked about the electromagnetic effect, the right-hand rule, where when electrons are flowing into the screen, it induces a magnetic field around them in the direction that your fingers are going if you hold up your right hand in a hitchhiker's thumb.
Yeah.
So when electrons are moving, even if they're orbiting the nuclei of atoms, they are putting forth a subtle electromagnetic waveform. And when, so your body emanates an electromagnetic field. The phone that I'm looking at right now, the laptop that the desk that it's sitting on is putting forth a magnetic field. Everything puts forth a magnetic signature, including the pyramids. And the pyramids were designed according to the research of Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who founded a new study called biogeometry. The shape of the pyramids is actually very exact. I mean, we know this for various reasons, but like, if you look at the photograph that was taken by a British Air Force pilot at dawn on, I want to say, the spring equinox in like 1940 or something, you can see shadows on one half of one of the faces, but the other half of the same face is totally illuminated. It's because it's not one face, it's two faces, and there's a slight indentation running up and down the center. According to Dr. Ibrahim Karim's research, this has a specific effect where it actually mutes a negative or a detrimental vibratory signature that is found in a lot of poisonous plants, for example. So to mute that portion of the magnetic signature, the magnetic profile that this building creates, the sides of the building were indented along those center lines just ever so slightly. That's all that's necessary to sort of mute that effect. So there's this resonant profile of this magnetic field that exists within the pyramid. And so you're going to get sort of a fine tuning of the theta neural oscillations that are induced by the sensory deprivation and by the fact that these structures are made out of earthen materials. So the Schumann resonance transmits through these earthen materials as well. That's why the sarcophagi are also made of stone. It all has to be made of earthen materials. So basically the king's chamber, they use that for healing, like energy healing, like Qigong and Reiki, like what Pachita probably was doing, that Mexican shaman I mentioned earlier. It's useful for various forms of healing. The Queen's Chamber was used for the baptism ritual, which was activating higher chakras. So yeah, it's
you can subtly see the biface division in the, we think of it as four sides, but you can just subtly see that indentation there.
Yep, it's not actually a square base. It's an 8-pointed star, technically speaking, due to those indentations. And that matters. You think about like when you get into sort of more occult magic, they talk about things like sigils as having power. That's true. Letters are kind of like sigils. Numbers are kind of like sigils. Shapes and forms. That's really what they are. They're all just shapes and forms, and that's something that the study of biogeometry demonstrates, is that forms have a specific energetic effect on sort of the electromagnetic field on the ether, if you will, that it is this electromagnetic output from all physical matter. It may all just be weak plasma or something, I'm thinking is the case.
It brings us back to the heck camouflage, that the animals can't see people with a Faraday cage. And then really quickly, what Jeffrey Drum mentions here is, let's see. So upon entering the red pyramid of Dashur, we became overwhelmed by the intense smell of ammonia and were able to see chemical staining on the walls of the inner chambers. So it gets back into the Epsom salts, the baptism tanks, the idea of the solution, like, okay, you have your box, you have a solution, and your body's in the solution. Is that to be weightless, or is there more to that?
Yeah. And mind you, I'm thinking that, when we talk about Egypt, that's the birthplace of alchemy, right? And that's why he calls it the land of chem. It's also considered to be the birthplace of chemistry. And so when we think about like the perennial Holy Trinity that I was talking about earlier, actually, there's a chemical version of it. Solute penetrates solvent, which receives the solute, and the offspring is solution. So I'm thinking that between Drum's research and my research, we're rapidly closing in on solving, the mysteries of alchemy and chemistry and Egypt. And by the way, anyone listening, please go bother Jeff Drum on Twitter, email him. I've tried to get a hold of him. He is a difficult man to get a hold of. And frankly, I'm sure he's got a lot of interest in his work, but tell him RedTailHawk has cool stuff to share with him. And we need to wrap, man, because he's actually a Freemason. So he's into a lot of the esoteric and occult stuff. And if I had the opportunity to share my research with him, I'm quite certain that I would blow his mind.
I was so on his website here. I was looking for a way to contact him, but he may, for reasons, be aloof that way. Oh, well, there's an email.
He's got an email. He's also on Twitter, on X. He's got a handle on here. He's there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've known people that they don't really respond on social media, but you fill out their form and they look at that because it could be business. So anyway,
I figure I'm a relative nobody, and so unless I have other people, putting words in his ear like, "Hey, that RedTailHawk guy, his work stands on the shoulders of your work, and you probably want to go talk to him." And until he gets some bugs put in his ear, he's probably not going to turn his head in my direction. He probably just figures I'm noise and not signal.
yeah. So what do you imagine what were the Egyptians pursuing and what did they find? I've got another level of thought question I have there, but it relates to the serpent. There was where did I have that here? Oh yeah. So various representations of the serpent, the staff, it shows up in the medical field. There we have our up and down triangles. The Kundalini awakening, were they entering a theta state and awakening? They're having an awakening experience, and what do you think they might have found?
I think they were doing past life memory exploration. I think they were doing healing, which is why the caduceus symbol and the rod of Asclepius, the healer, are commonly found as medical iconography. And I think they were activating higher chakras, and they were doing all of this by stimulating theta neural oscillations. They may have also been consuming certain psychedelics. There's
Ergot.
Very likely ergot is what LSD is derived from. That was what they were consuming in the Eleusinian mysteries. They would drink this ergot laced beer, and then after like a day of fasting, walking 20 plus miles or whatever, and they get back to Eleusis, and there's this telestrion, which if you look at the architecture, it's different from the typical Greek architecture. The pillars are all interior, which creates a sort of visual seclusion, right? And if they're doing these greater mysteries at nighttime, going back to that 1998 LSD trial I talked about, in that trial, they had 3 participants in a completely pitch black laboratory setting trip on LSD, and they had 2 horseshoe magnets rotating at half a hertz. And all 3 test participants witnessed diffuse blobs of colored light. So if the human aura consists of, chakra light being put forth, then at Eleusis, when they're tripping on ergot laced beer, and by the way, in that 1998 study, the researchers pointed out that von Reichenbach in like 1851 reported seeing magnet light, and they think that this was ergot induced. So yeah, at Eleusis, I think that what they were being shown was the spirit body, and they were being taught about the perennial Holy Trinity, the divine masculine, divine feminine, the divine child, the enlightened being, and the Orphic egg, the serpent. The reason that the Hierophant was the teacher of the Eleusinian mysteries, or perhaps better said, the reason that the name of the teacher of the Eleusinian mysteries was Hierophant, is because that word consists of Chi, Rho, and Phi. Chi is the divine masculine, Rho is the divine feminine, and Phi is the divine child, the enlightened being. You think about the Apollo Phoebus, you think about photon. These words basically start with Phi. There's a lot of words like this. I've got a number of them listed, like epiphany, right? Like there's neophyte, right? A newly enlightened, right? Epiphany, one who is upon enlightenment, is like, so that moment of enlightenment is an epiphany moment. All of these words are giving us clues into what was going on there. So it may have been that they were consuming ergot, We know from Brian Murarescu's book, The Immortality Key, that they found ergot in not just a drinking vessel, but in a human jawbone at Mas Castellar de Pontos on the east coast of Spain, which they believe was a satellite location for celebrating the Eleusinian mysteries. It could have been that they were taking mescaline. I know that in the medicine man tradition, that's a component of the tradition is mescaline. And I looked it up, and from like hour 4 to 6 in a mescaline trip, the brain is put into theta neural oscillation states. Another thing that induces theta neural oscillation states is lavender. So as we're talking about baptism and like baths, right, bath solutions, one might drift again across the pond to like Rome and Greece. The Roman baths, they would oftentimes put lavender blossoms in the baths at the bathhouses. They did that for a number of reasons, but one of them is likely going back to the Egyptians. I'm thinking that the Egyptians probably put lavender blossoms in the sarcophagi as part of this baptism ritual to help induce theta neural oscillations as well. The Romans actually, to tie this into sort of Bitcoin and economics, they had I don't know if it was a myth, an old wives' tale or something, that you should stay away from lavender bushes because that's where asps, poisonous asps, vipers would hang out. Well, I talked about the asp hieroglyph before, right, as being an indicator of Kundalini awakenings and chakra activations. And if that's related to theta neural oscillations, then you could potentially see how that was maybe a distortion of a truth,
right?
that lavender is an attractor of the serpent, right? But yeah, a pound of lavender blossoms would cost a farmhand like a month's worth of wages back then, probably, induced scarcity due to this sort of misunderstanding of lavender's association with the serpent.
And as a healing technology to this day, you can go down to the grocery store, buy yourself a bag of Epsom salts with lavender right in them. People like it, people know it, people want it, and it works. And to this day, thinking of the egg, and then bridging to the direction of a question I wanted to bring up, but I didn't want to go down that path too early. But the egg, and then you think about modern day disclosure mythology around UFO, UAP, all the things, non-human intelligence, NHI. And whether it's who is it, David Grush or James Barber, and they talk about these things. One, supposedly the story along James Barber's line of working for the deep state and military contractor type things is that they would dog whistle or use psi ability to beckon whatever, and things that came were literal eggs, like egg things, craft, impenetrable, and they'd catch them. And his story being that he was flying one away in a helicopter. They'd catch it, they'd wrap it, and they'd carry it away to wherever to try to like figure it out. And he got penetrated. I'd call it a Kundalini experience he had while he was flying, where he like didn't want to wreck, but he was having this feeling. And it was that feeling with an intense message of just pure love and almost like apology, or just sort of like, we understand, like this is not good, but we love you, sort of was what he was describing. Anyway, there's the egg. That speaks to the concept, and your answer to the question I had a week or so ago was that, like, as above, so below. So here we have UAP, UFO things, paranormal things, whether it's the councils of Nicaea, the burning of the library, the UFO crash that's quickly smothered and controlled and whitewashed and defended through aggression, including everything, unaliveness and everything. Um, and so they're like controlling powers that do not want disclosure or see it all through the lens of power, control, structure, maintaining control, like non-disclosure. Now we're kind of leaning in these weird little leakagey ways of disclosure or awakening slowly, weirdly, through movies or distraction from the Epstein files. I don't know, but like, okay, yeah, we got aliens on ice and we got UFOs and whatever, whatever. But there are players in this that are like, there's no single thing about it. Like one case looks this way and another case looks that way. The government's involved and the agents involved that are, say, let's call them human agents. All these agencies, all these players getting into men in black that almost aren't human. Maybe they're human, men in suits, robots, aliens. Then you have the alien factor, which is like all the stories about that. You've mentioned, I think, maybe the encyclopedia of alien stuff. The stories that people have there when they remember something or had an experience or claim to have had one where the aliens themselves aren't just like a certain type or a certain like path. It's like Star Trek puzzle of everything. And then above that, there's a spiritual level where it's everything from good and angelic to weird and trickster and unnavigable. Maybe hooking us on curiosity and just saying, keep looking and like, oh, I'll hurt you. Oh, I'll help you. Oh, I'm here and I'm gone. And it's tricks and stuff. And everything to something you might say is like, that's pretty awful. Like, I don't know what the abduction experiences that are not positive or do not seem to give a shit about humans or that hurt people or the whatever cow mutilations. I'm covering a whole bunch of crazy stuff. I'm not saying, hey, I'm a crazy person. All I'm saying is that the mythology involved here, from a human level to an alien level to a non-human intelligence spiritual level, the mythology surrounding that is so various and weird. You can't just say, oh, it kind of fits this bucket. Maybe it's a tower of things. It's sort of like a puzzle of competing weird things. What sense do you put on that puzzle that I see out there?
All right. Well,
That's a lot.
I there are okay. So my thought on aliens or UFOs and UAPs is that they fall into three categories, generally speaking. You have the top secret military crafts that are like based on Tesla tech and stuff like that, that, you know, the government keeps secret that nobody knows about. And, you know, you see something moving around weird in the sky and maybe it's one of those. Then you have sort of the extraterrestrials that are from this density, this dimension of reality. I think they are the most rare. I think they exist, but they're going to be the most rare because they're encumbered by the same restrictions that we are, generally speaking, in this dimension. Where the most common are going to be the secret government crafts, and then the third category, which is the interdimensional from another density. Because I mean, how hard is it to travel when you're, you know, interdimensional, right? So you can just kind of zip around the universe and reveal yourself, and then, you know, cease to reveal yourself, almost like a magician. I think that this gets sort of back into the Adam and Eve stuff and like the Luciferian role in the grand scheme of things when we get into like the Epstein stuff and the cover-ups and all of that type of thing. The way that I think about it is that the creator is interested in new volumes, new lives being added to the Akashic records that are rich and interesting in the same way.
Experiences.
Yeah, like you don't, most people enjoy watching movies about, you know, interesting characters like Limitless or Lucy or Superman or a lot of the superhero movies. By the way, hero itself is Kai and Ro. It's actually pointing at enlightened beings. Then you don't just have superheroes, though. You also have supervillains. I mean, Batman would be a pretty boring series if he was just always beating up like low-level goons robbing the local 7-Eleven. Like Spider-Man too. Like there's always a supervillain that has some kind of a superpower. And earlier I mentioned that there is a negative path to enlightenment, that they skip over the heart chakra and they go for the wisdom chakra. That's one thing that George Lucas was pointing out in Star Wars with the honorific title that's given to the Sith Lords of Darth, right? Darth is Doth. And they skip over Tifereth, the heart. And so Doth is a way of acknowledging, oh, they've activated the wisdom chakra. This is why the trope of the evil genius is a thing, right? Lex Luthor, etc. And we watch movies about these types of characters too. The Joker was a very successful movie, perhaps less successful, but there's still a niche audience for movies about like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy or the Menendez brothers or whatever. Like, people are interested in those, in like sort of learning more about those types of people, even if they don't identify with it, just because it's weird and fringy. It's interesting, right? And I think as above, so below. The creator is interested in rich lifetimes, rich experiences, both positive and negative. And being the creator, there is no act of creation that is not first predicated upon free will. So the creator respects each and every one of our free will to choose to polarize towards service to others, good, positive polarity, or service to the self, evil, negative polarity. So I think the role of like the Luciferians, I think Lucifer was, a fallen angel, they say, right? I think Lucifer was like one of those group souls we talked about earlier, imprints, and how we would all live one another's lives. I think Lucifer was essentially a group soul. One might use the word egregore. I'm fond of the term social memory complex. And essentially what they agreed to was a contract to come to Earth and basically catalyze self-awareness in humans, and then also spend approximately 75 to 76, 77,000 years, basically 3 precessions of the axis of the Earth rotation. The 3 great years, 3 Mayan calendar loops, right? And that's how long this phase of like sort of universe school is for Earth. It's 3 precessions of the axis. And what happens is, I might have to switch to my wired headphones here.
Yeah,
I just
no
heard
worries.
I just heard the beep boop in my AirPods.
So we're barely into those 3 years. I mean, we're
near the end of that 3 great year cycle, and that's what the Mayan calendar was telling us, basically, and that's where a lot of the revelations and apocalypse stuff comes into play. Hopefully this switches here.
Did you say 75,000 years or 7,500 years?
1,000. 1 precession of Earth's axis is 25,772 years.
Okay, so you're talking the Garden of Eden type, the fall. That timeline started that back then.
Yes.
So what are we looking at? Bronze Age or something? And I gotta. Boy, what was that?
It's the before time. It's the long. But basically, what happened is that group soul. Can you hear me? Oh, all right. With the
I'm just looking it up here. And I don't hear you right now. I'm not hearing you. The Middle Paleolithic period.
Now I can.
Gotcha. I hear you now. 75,000 years ago, 7,300 BCE, was within the Middle Paleolithic period, the late Pleistocene, characterized by the rise of early modern humans.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
So my thought is that Lucifer, it's not even my thought. I read this in some materials that were incredibly consistent with all the other research I've done. Brandon Quittem actually taught me a term recently on a podcast he did. It was consilience, which is basically where you have, this source is pointing here, this other source is pointing here, this other source is pointing here. All these sources are independent and they're all pointing in the same direction, which isn't, deductive proof, but it's smoke, and we should probably go look there to see if there's fire if we're looking for fire. So these sources, this one source in particular suggested that Lucifer was a social memory complex, an egregore, a group soul, whatever you want to think of it as, and they agreed to a contract with, you could say it's sort of the landlord of Earth, which my understanding of who that landlord is Yahweh, Jehovah. That Yahweh is not necessarily the one infinite creator that all of the universe is in sort of the Baruch Spinoza sense of like pantheism. It's more like Yahweh is like a sub logos, that this planet is Yahweh's garden, and it was a paradise. And there's no egos when there's no self-awareness, right? That's going to be a paradise. There's not going to be any bickering and fighting. It's just basically we're all animals who are not self-aware. But Yahweh was having trouble generating self-aware beings on his garden project of Earth. And so he looked to sort of the other angels, was like, yo, I need help, guys. I'm not getting any self-awareness to pop here. And so Yahweh and Lucifer struck a contract where Lucifer agreed to sort of atomize out of the group soul state, right, into individual souls who would incarnate and then reincarnate within the same family every time. And then what they would do is create conditions on Earth that were conducive to creating awesome life experiences, both positive and negative. And the way I think about their role is as gardeners of Yahweh's garden. And the gardening technique that they're using is kind of a low work method, I guess, where they're allowing overgrowth. Like if you're thinking from the gardener's perspective, I'm sure that Lucifer has to do a bunch of work in order to pull this off, all these cover-ups, all this stuff that they've done in order to make this happen. I'm sure it's been a lot of work. But like from the gardener's perspective, you're just allowing overgrowth, a canopy of overgrowth to take over the garden. And that canopy of overgrowth blocks the light, right? Enlightenment, right? So there's two kinds of plants that are going to be able to penetrate that canopy of overgrowth. There's the positive plants, the good plants that, they gild up with other plants that are around them, and they create beneficial soil conditions, and they help all the plants that are around them to grow more than the canopy of overgrowth, and they penetrate up through that canopy of overgrowth and they find the light. Then there's the negatively polarized plants. There's a term, it's called allelopathic. It's kind of the opposite of like a guild of plants. Like in the Native American tradition, they have what's called the Three Sisters Garden, which is corn, pole beans, and squash. The corn grows and becomes big stalks. The pole beans grow up the corn stalks. That's the poles. And then the squash, the giant leaves, they spread out and they kind of protect the soil, help it to retain moisture. There's nitrogen fixers. I think the pole beans are nitrogen fixers, so they're putting nitrogen into the soil. And they all benefit from one another, and so that's a guild of plants. Well, the opposite of benefiting other plants around you is what allelopathic plants do. Like there are certain plants you just should not plant together because they're not going to play nice. And that's what the negatively polarized, the service to self oriented, the evil plants are going to do. Is they're going to basically kill off all the plants that are around them, and soak up all the nutrients that the soil has to offer, and take all that sunlight for themselves. But
Right.
in either case, what you've got is there's some stiff competition to deal with if you're on the negative path. If you're on the positive path, there's a lot of cover-ups and conspiracies and seeking and finding that is necessary, and you got to be a stout plant. You got to be thick and stocky, like a Filipino wrestler or something, in order to push up through all that heavy overgrowth to find the light. And both of those types of plants are going to, generally speaking, have rather interesting life experiences. And it may be ambitious to try and assume the perspective of the creator, but I'm going to try. And I'm going to share this idea that I think most faith traditions would agree with the idea that the creator is all knowing. And frankly, it, to me, seems like omniscience, the state of all knowingness, would get real boring real fast. There's no novelty, there's no discovery.
Yeah.
And so it's
Where
kind of
do you
like,
go from there? What do you do? Like, okay, here it is.
you stop being omniscient and you explode yourself into a gajillion electromagnetic waveforms that form a constructive and destructive interference pattern that eventually condenses into what we call physical matter. And that matter shifts around, and you've got the four elements, and they combine, and eventually life conditions emerge on various spheres, on various planets, and eventually that life, it evolves until it is capable of learning that it is self-aware. And basically the creator is able to use each and every one of us as an aperture, like you would look through a camera or a peephole on a doorway, except instead of just being a visual aperture, we have 5 senses or more, depending on what tradition you're talking about. And so the creator gets to experience each of our lives. And I think that, in that way, each of our lives is a gift to the creator, and we're suffering in this existence in various ways, like Buddha taught. And that's the price that we're paying, that the creator appreciates, that we're able to give the creator these rich life experiences. And it's like, think about America's Funniest Home Videos, or Kids Say the Darndest Things, or the Darwin Awards. We do some crazy, stupid human stuff, man. And I don't think an all-knowing, all-powerful being would find themselves in a lot of those situations. Like, they would just be so far beyond that it wouldn't even be an afterthought to do or think some of the stuff that we come up with to do or think. So in a way, we're kind of like God's Darwin Awards, or
Bottles of fine wine. That's the metaphor that Robert Lazar claimed, that he was given documents when he was kind of read into things, and whether he was being tested or it was a psyop itself. One of the things was like the aliens that had been communicated with considered humans not like silly little animals, even though relatively we could be. We actually were containers of souls, or basically bottles of wine was the reference, was like full of a rich life experience, upon ascendance or completion of which is corked and poured into the bath of divine experience, the library, if you will.
Earlier you mentioned like young souls and old souls, right?
Right,
So
right.
like, if the younger souls, maybe they activated that solar plexus chakra as sort of a lower animal in a previous life more recently. And so maybe they're on life number 2 or 3, maybe even life number 1. Whereas like an old soul, they're on life number 20 or 50 or 150 or whatever it is. And so to the idea of like a fine bottle of wine, aging is that sort of developmental process and sort of moving us from that sort of unrefined, unripe state into a refined or a ripe state where,
Right.
you know, we're suitable for companionship at these higher levels with these sort of divinity, these deities.
And our childlike view on God would be like, well, people I think believe, well, he's all powerful and he's all good. Well, what is that? Why does anything bad ever happen? Well, then we have the devil. And then okay, so it's some sort of like contest, but how does that make sense? So God then allows that, right? So and
Yeah,
that's where people get stuck in the rationale of like good and evil and like, yeah, but there's God. And so when you score that touchdown, it's like, oh, thank God. And when you get tackled and you don't, was that the devil or just God wasn't looking at the time? Or just nothing makes any sense. But the way you frame it are like good or bad, it's all experience, which from that perspective, if you look at God or the divine nature of it all, what we think of as good and bad is not the perspective of what's right and wrong at a divine level, which is
right.
a little morbid, but also like I get it. I don't
Well,
know.
ultimately, there's nothing to fear, right? I mean, the Bible makes that clear well over 100 times. And frankly, both paths, the positive and the negative path, they merge down the line after a certain point. I mean, they say that there's seventh heaven is a term. Well, you have 7 days of the week, 7 chakras, 7 colors, 7 musical notes before the octave repeats. The universe is infinite. There was no Big Bang. It's timeless, and there are 7 stages to progress through. And the first stage is that basic material phase where matter is coalescing, forming spheres, forming planets, forming stars, etc. Then you have the second phase, which is life forms like plants and lower animals, lower being like non-self-aware. The third stage, we call it third density, is where you have self-awareness. And at this point, now that you have agency, now you're on the clock, right? You're on the hook. If you have no idea that you're even a self, how could you be on the hook for your choices? You're not making choices. You're a bot running automated
A
subroutines, kind of like
biological, yeah, right.
what was that Ryan Reynolds movie, Free Guy or whatever, where he's an
Oh, right.
NPC
The
who becomes
NPCs.
self-aware.
Yeah, right.
That's a great example of you know that Adam and Eve concept of moving from non-self-aware to self-aware, activating that solar plexus chakra, then to escape sort of the lower region, the denser physical material densities of this reality. We have to self-birth that light body by activating those higher chakras, which gives us a light body that is compatible with the higher densities, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th density. According to some various sources, around 6th density, midway through the 6th density is when the positive path and the negative path sort of reconverge, and basically there is no more polarity at that point. You're kind of in the home stretch, going into 7th density, and 8th density is really just 1st density of the next octave of existence.
So would you describe it as like we are working our way towards the 4th density out of the 3rd? And
Yes.
that's the awakening that's happening steadily, slowly, perhaps ultimately, and maybe not like all at once, like a rapture, but sort of in pops here and there. It's just, but the simmer or the little bubbles are simmering, and it's going to get to be more of a froth, and then it kind of catches on.
Yeah, I think we're basically, if you think of, oh, and by the way, it's not just people who experience these phases. The planet Earth itself experiences these phases. So the Mayan calendar, the 2012 thing, was kind of like driving down a highway and passing a mile marker. How different is your experience 3 feet in front of that mile marker versus 3 feet past that mile marker? It's not all that different. So there's it's a graduation. There's it's almost like you're taking two pieces of fabric. One is third density and one is fourth density, and you're sewing together a seam. Well, you have to have a little bit of margin to work with to get those two things to sort of come together and transition from one piece to the next. So I think that, you know, the ongoing geomagnetic excursion that started in like 1945 or 47 or whenever it was, the uncovering of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Nag Hammadi library, the the alien stuff that's coming out, all this stuff is, you know, we talk about the apocalypse and the end times and Revelation. Apocalypse is just it just means unveiling in Greek. So I think we're at that point, and that's why we're seeing all this sort of crazy stuff happening. Is that we're working our way out of the you know, the septic tank that was third density, and we're working towards a transition to fourth density. What's going to wind up happening is there's going to be basically three possible outcomes for the inhabitants of Earth as this shift sort of finalizes. You're going to have the entities who sort of graduated on either path are going to go to a planet that is full of people who are like them. So from what I understand, Earth itself is going to become a positively polarized fourth density planet. So all of the, you know, the good guys, the enlightened beings that are good guys, are going to be who populate Earth next. All of the sort of bad guys, your Rasputin, your Genghis Khan types, who were able to achieve enlightenment along the negative path. And by the way, I think that's what a lot of the Epstein people are doing. I think they know what they're doing. They're into esoteric stuff. They're into the occult and all this
They're
stuff.
pursuing their own kind of like enlightenment, but through a Darth path.
Yes, they're skipping the heart chakra and they're going whole hog self-service.
Right.
So they're pursuing that path. They're not going to be on Earth after this. They're going to go to a fourth density negative planet, which one might refer to as hell. And they're going to have to compete with all the other like badasses who are good at service to self. And if this is dog eat dog on Earth, man, I don't even want to know what it's like on a fourth density negative planet. That would be ridiculous. I nothing to do with that. No, thank you. I'd rather go where everybody is into serving their neighbors and they're all about love.
Are you saying like physical planets, or just sort of what do you mean by that? Would you think there'd be something physically distance about it, or just a dimensional thing, or what does that look like?
I think it's more of a dimensional thing. I think that Earth is actually 7 Earths. And in the same way that we were talking about like the visible spectrum of light, or for example, dog whistles are audible to dogs, but not to us. There are these bandwidths of compatibility or bandwidths of interoperability. And so you think about like the physical vessel, the human body that we have, it's, you know, compatible with other physical matter. But if there's light, if there's sound that's beyond our bandwidth of compatibility, why wouldn't there be sort of matter or material that is beyond our interoperability, right? Like we think about ghosts and spirits or whatever. We think about like superheroes. Flash Gordon can sort of phase through a door if he speeds up his vibration fast enough. The X-Men character Kitty Pryde could phase through stuff. I think that's, you know, sort of art using lies to tell the truth. And show us that, yeah, we can actually phase through stuff that, you know, is incompatible with us at a vibratory level. So I think basically there are multiple earths. They're all sort of coincidental and sort of mutually interpenetrating one another. And so at a certain point, Earth's vibration will elevate beyond a certain threshold, and we will be basically inhabiting fourth density Earth. And when that happens, the people who their personal soul vibratory speeds are compatible with that will remain with that Earth. The people who are, you know, they've achieved sort of a different flavor of a high vibration, the negative path, they're going to move on to a negatively polarized planet where other negatively polarized entities have gone. And everyone who sort of was not harvested or did not graduate, right, they're going to reincarnate on another third density planet. That's God's infinite mercy. We have as many incarnations as we need in order to make our choice and polarize in one direction or another. That's why I said at the beginning, everyone's going to experience a Kundalini awakening and enlightenment at some point, whether it's this life or the next. So as Itzhak Bentov said, don't hold your breath.
I'm trying to visualize it because I'm a meat sack in meat space, and while I can imagine like awakening or enlightenment, when it gets to dimensional stuff, it's like, oh man, what then is that? And let alone, okay, you got your fourth density, then you have your fifth, and then the sixth being like the synthesis, I think you mentioned maybe.
Yeah, the positive and negative is in the first half of sixth density, but around the midway point, they reconverge.
What would be the fifth density? Can you imagine, or have you studied it?
I think they're all densities of light in the same way that like first, second, and third densities are all densities of matter. The difference between fourth, fifth, and sixth densities are: fourth density is the density of love. That's where we learn the lessons of love. Fifth density is the lessons of wisdom. Sixth density is sort of the balancing of love and wisdom, right? Because like it might be wise to never donate to charity and keep all your money for yourself, but that's not very loving. It might be incredibly loving to martyr yourself for a good cause, but maybe you're 20 years old and you still have 40 or 50 years of good life left where you could have done a lot more good work. And so maybe that's incredibly loving, but unwise. And so maybe in sixth density, that's where we're learning to sort of perfect the balance between love and wisdom.
Interesting. Really quickly and randomly, have you ever heard of this, the Wing Makers? This came out, I don't know, 26 years ago, 27 years ago. The whole idea being it's a kind of it's a tale, if you will, but it evolved into philosophy and incorporated art and music. But anyway, just curious if you heard of that. The concept being that more and more of us are awakening, and that's kind of a deliberate process, and that we are basically learning and evolving. It makes me think of the third to fourth, graduation, if you will. And but anyway,
I would buy that, and one of the biggest reasons I would buy that is because flight symbolism, esoterically speaking, and in like occult circles, is indicative of enlightenment. That's why there are wings on the caduceus symbol, and that's why Quetzalcoatl was a feathered serpent, and that's why dragons have wings, and that's why, you know, the feather of Ma'at is there. That's why, you know, raptor birds are symbolic of enlightenment. It's the idea that, you know, light, the sources of light are really high up there, right? Well, what also goes really high, it's raptor birds like eagles and hawks who figure out how to efficiently soar on thermal updrafts, and they've got this really sharp vision, and it's so they see the big picture from high above. That's why all of these traditions, that's why like Horus was a hawk-headed god, and that's why, again, dragons have wings, dragon, Draco, serpent, all of these things are connected. Not to mention the fact that these raptor birds, they're known for calling serpents upwards. You know, going through the drive-through, doing a little flyby, picking up a serpent for a snack, calling that serpent upwards. On like the Mexican flag, you've got a raptor bird wrestling with a serpent. If you look at a lot of raptor bird symbolism, a lot of times it's clutching a ribbon. That ribbon is a serpentine form, and it used to be a serpent, but I'm going to go with Luciferian actors obfuscated out the reference to the serpent and put a ribbon in there. That's, I think those same actors changed the spelling of jinn so that it was no longer D-J-I-N-N. Instead, it was J-I-N-N. I think when George Lucas brought Star Wars to Hollywood, there was probably a Luciferian actor who was part of those meetings, maybe a producer or something, who was like, okay, that's cool. I like the Jedi thing, but you got to drop the D. There was an Egyptian magician named Jedi, D-J-E-D-I. The Sith that came from Seth, the god of chaos in Egypt. Also another one from the Bible, the Magi who visited Jesus, the three wise men, throat chakra, wisdom chakra, or the three kings, crown chakra. These were enlightened masters who were esoterically informed. They were astrologers. That's why they were chasing stars to find this kid, right? Well, the Magi is really the Medjay, M-E-D-J-A-Y. For those familiar with Assassin's Creed, that's the Medjay. They were, yeah. So the way M-E-D-J-A-Y, you've got the Jedi, the D-J, E-D-I. All these things were spelled differently over the course of time, and the spellings that lacked the DJ were what became popular, or that they were pushed because they were obfuscating the connections to the serpent. I mean, look at Graham Hancock's show. Dude is always talking about serpent symbolism and, you know, archaeoastronomy and, you know, ancient flood myths and stuff. Well, why doesn't he know what the serpents are symbolizing? And how does he have millions of people watching his show and nobody can get the message across? Hey, the serpent is talking about the Kundalini serpent. It's talking about chakra activation and enlightenment. There's a reason for that. That's the cover up. That's the overgrowth that the gardeners have created to make it hard for us to find the truth.
Very interesting. You can see how whether it's conspiracy theories or just simply news, you might pay attention, and what's going on here? It pervades energies and powers throughout our lives. I want to be respectful of your time, but I do not want to be remiss to ask you about your book. What is in a name?
So yeah, that's the main title of the book. The subtitle is The Language of the Birds. I'm borrowing from Shakespeare's Juliet, who, you know, when talking about Romeo, said, "Oh, why does your name have to be Romeo? Wherefore art thou Romeo? Why are you Romeo? The only Romeo is a member of the Montague family, and they're my family's sworn enemies. Why can't you be something else? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. What's even in a name anyways? And so that's what started me off on this journey, was trying to figure out what was in the name RedTailHawk. And so it's a question. And so the subtitle, The Language of the Birds, is sort of a partial answer to that. The book, it starts off with some info about me, some backstory, and then it gets into medicine man, my reception of my name. Then I move into reincarnation. Then I get into like the pole flip hypothesis and how that helps to explain lost civilizations. And lost civilizations like Mu and Atlantis kind of help to explain, like, why do we see like the Birdman holding the bucket in Mesopotamia and in South America and in Egypt and all these places? Why are there all these symbols all around the world? You probably found some at the petroglyphs that you were checking out in the desert that are found in other places around the world. How did all these symbols get around the world? Well, it's because mankind isn't just 6,000 years old. That's just the most recent time that we had one of these global flood events and everything got reset. And then the survivors emerged and formed new societies. And that's why all these ancient societies emerged about 6,000 years ago. That leads us into sort of the subject of religious symbolism and everything. And basically that's been the bulk of the book, and the bulk of my research is learning about religions and decoding them. So we talked about ergot earlier, E-R-G-O-T. It's really interesting. There's a French Hermetic philosopher, Fulcanelli, who wrote a couple of books about 100 years ago. I'm holding up the Dwellings of the Philosophers. I already read his first book. It's called The Mystery of the Cathedrals. And in that book, I learned that so like Ebonics or Scottish English or Australian English, or in the was it Guy Ritchie movie, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels with Brad Pitt, where
he's a piker.
He's a pikey, right? The gypsies.
Pikey.
Do you like dags? What? Do you like dags, right? Do you like dogs? He says dags. They speak in ways that are difficult for the majority out group who lives in the same local region as them. They're going to have trouble understanding it. So like Scottish English was really hard for English speakers to understand. Scottish English is really thick as an accent. Same with Australian, right? If you listen to Australians speaking in like Australian lingo, it's like, yo, could you translate for me, bro? I don't know what you just said.
Right.
All of those are forms of argot, A-R-G-O-T. And sort of the esoteric, spiritual, occult version of argot is known by multiple names: the language of the gods, the language of the court, and lowercase g gods, of course, also known as the language of the birds. So what's in a name? Well, when you're going through all these etymologies like Fulcanelli does, he does a lot of etymology in his books. You find a lot of really interesting things, like, again, baptism, raptor, hierophant, chariot, Hera, hero, Heracles, Chiron, Charon, the ferryman who would ferry people across the river Styx, Eros, Cupid. All of these words are related to Kai and Ro, or in the case of the Egyptian side of things, Ba, Ptah, right? Like, there's a lot of deep and profound truths to be mined in words, and so that's the bulk of the work, I think. Other than like figuring out what were they doing at Eleusis, and what's the origin and science behind the baptism ritual, and what's kind of the science behind the spirit body and all that type of stuff. That's the bulk of the book. We've talked about quite a bit of it, but I can't. You mentioned, you say you don't have the greatest memory, and I'm ranting about all this stuff. Frankly, there are so many things that are in the book that I have failed to mention in our conversation that people are still going to be like, okay, I still need to get this book when it comes out, because there's a lot of stuff in it that he hasn't been able to rattle off yet.
Awesome. And it's been a process of self-discovery in a way as well. Like carved into the temple in Apollo at Delphi is know thyself. And so are you coming to know thyself? I know it's not a destination, but a journey, but that's part of the process is knowing thyself.
Yeah. Again, I went almost 53 months not knowing what the hell happened to me that day in September of 2018. And it was that clue that Medicine Man gave me that, tipped over the domino. And by this process, I have discovered myself. I wrote a poem the week after the awakening happened, and I talked about how children, they sort of lose their innocence because of training. Listen here, act like this, right? And that pure self that the child puts on display without any sort of egoic, prideful notions of, oh, well, what are other people going to think of me? No, they're just being themselves. And that's, they say that you have to, the enlightened being sort of has the mind of a child mind, that fascination with everything, and that devil may care attitude about, I'm going to be me, and you can accept me or not accept me for what I am, but I'm going to be me. And I've discovered things like you mentioned. I'm an avid reader. Yeah, now I am. Now that I'm on this research bender. When I was a kid, I was too. I was punished if I misbehaved. Reading was taken away from me as a punishment. But at a certain point, I was like, wait a minute, this TV thing is awesome. Like a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm getting 12 frames per second here. I can't read that fast. I'm not Rain Man. But yeah, I've resumed my love of reading and my love of studying. I've learned why what happened to me. I've always loved helping people. I've always loved sharing, teaching, and learning. It's the clear communication, the throat chakra. It's the love, the heart chakra. It has been a process of discovering who I am and what I've become through all of this stuff. And I got to tell you, I wouldn't trade the worst parts of my life away to, because I wouldn't be who I am now without those things. I've been homeless before. I lived in my car for a while. I ate food out of the trash can as long as it was sanitary and wrapped up, it hadn't touched other stuff. This was fallout from the 07-08 subprime financial crisis. I graduated in December of 07, right into that horrible market, and I couldn't find a job. And so I had to make do with what I could. My credit score dropped below 600. I was bouncing between, relatives' houses, sleeping on couches, and at a certain point, I just couldn't do that anymore. And I was living in my car, bathing at a gym. So I've had some pretty rough times in my life. I've had a lot of great times too. I don't want to, sell a sob story here, but I've definitely had some hardships, and I wouldn't trade any of that stuff, because without that stuff, I would not be where I am. In fact, during that homeless phase is when I think I did some of my best karmic work as a teacher at a learning center, where we would teach kids. I was the math and critical thinking lead, and we would neurologically profile all of our students so that we could figure out, okay, this kid, it's going to be best if we approach them in this way, but this other kid over here requires a slightly different approach. Some are more visual, some are more auditory, some are more tactile, hands-on, kinesthetic. Some have a need for completion, some have a need for propriety, some have a need for novelty, and they need to switch tasks, every 5 or 10 minutes. They get labeled as ADHD, but
Right.
95% of ADHD diagnoses are BS. The people just don't know how to do the mental jujitsu that you have to do with a kid like that.
Yeah.
If they'll give you 5-10 minutes of good work on subject A before their mind saturates, then you just switch. It's just like being at the gym. When you're done doing squats, does that mean you can't do curls? No. You have different muscle groups you can work out, and just like education, you can switch what you're working on and exercise a different area of the brain. So we were basically teaching using the golden rule. We were
Right.
looking from the perspective of the other. And basically, I think that was where I did a lot of my sort of heavy hitting. That's where I earned a lot of karma points or whatever, was by teaching children how to contend with the obstacles that they're going to have to contend with in this life, in the mathematical thinking, critical thinking skills, learning how to solve puzzles, learning how to think through things, but doing it in a way that was tailored to each of them. And they knew that I knew who they were as individuals. An example, we were talking about the Akashic records earlier. I remember a student, his name was Akash. He was very smart. He was, so smart that he would get frustrated in school, in his regular school math classes, because his teacher would make him show all of his steps. But I didn't make him do that, except for when he was just learning or acquiring a new skill or a new concept. Then I'd make him show it. But once he proved to me that he could do it, I'd be like, all right, dude, if you can do it mentally, do it mentally. I'm not gonna make your handwriting muscles hurt. I'm not gonna waste your time. If you can fly through this, you fly, brother. And I told him the reason that I allowed him to do that, but his regular school teachers didn't, is because I knew him. We had shared experiences, and I respected his mind. But respect comes from shared experience. And his school teachers, they get cycled out every year. And, every teacher has 20, 30 kids they've got to learn. And they've got 9 months to do it. And there's winter break and fall break and spring break. It just breaks all that stuff up. It's hard for a teacher to really gain the in-depth knowledge that is necessary in order to really tailor your approach to each kid. And frankly, most schools are not equipped with the infrastructure to handle teaching in an individualized way. But that's really the way to do it. And that's, people feel loved when you walk up to your neighbor and you're like, oh, hey, John, how's the wife? Oh, is she still suffering from that plantar fasciitis you were telling me about? Oh, how's the kids doing? Oh, is he really enjoying Boy Scouts? Yeah. What's his favorite part about Boy? When you know someone, they feel loved. They feel seen, acknowledged, right? That's the golden rule. That's why it is what it is.
Biddy's saying hi. She's joining in.
Hey, Biddy.
We have competing spaces tonight, but yeah, welcome, Biddy. It makes, my parents were both teachers. Teaching is hard. And I think I've got many thoughts about all this, but part of it is with the human awakening process, we're shifting from everyone in a row, everyone at their desk all day. It's reading, writing, arithmetic. And if you don't fit, we're going to hammer it and fit you in that mold. And so, yeah, kids didn't have a choice, or maybe they got beat. But kids are, they are who they are. They're untethered spirits, and just learning, exploring, and finding themselves. And then a framework, out of love or otherwise, frameworks are put on them to function and fit. And here's who you are. Here's who we are. Here's how you think and do and whatever. And so I think historically, or, past generations, you grew up and you were quickly fit and funneled. And now maybe that's breaking loose a little bit at good schools with good teachers. You think about your life experience, the contribution you have, that wherever that wine gets, whatever glass your wine gets poured into, or the pool, just imagine the impact of all these kids who may or may not remember you, but would and will. You enrich so many lives. I can only imagine. Teachers do. A lot of good teachers do.
Yeah, you're giving me chills, man.
It's true. Yeah. I think as hard as my parents have retired, but as hard as some of that career was, and you see generations and kids change, or you got challenging people in the world and challenging kids, challenging people that have challenging kids. And then, them at 7, the man. They had some of those like in middle school. And also, you go from a kid going from exploration and just being here now to I've got a preteen where suddenly everything is about fitting in and where you rank and your identity. And you're just going to, being smart's not cool and all these things. And then they graduate from that. But you did good work, man. I mean, seriously, I think it's something you can be proud of. Anyway, I would just say thank you for going through a hard period of your life. Even as you're dealing with that, you gave and gave. And that's not just like, well, good job, here's your certificate. It's like at a spiritual level, I would say that was some serious spiritual work that is not just distant past. That is future. So, and now, but it's awesome to think about.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. I guess this is a Bitcoin show, isn't it? Bitcoin is, I was going to bring this up anyway, but we had so many things to talk about. We're at 3 hours. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I can start tying it into Bitcoin if you want.
So some people are like, I got to work tomorrow morning, but
oh, they can watch the replay.
Yeah. Watch it twice if you didn't catch it all. So when I think of the bubbles starting to appear on the edges of our pot and starting to break loose and simmering towards from the third density to the fourth, Bitcoin is sort of turns the heat up a little bit, or maybe it changes the water. It lowers the boiling temperature. So it's beckoning this turning. And I guess I could go on and on about that. We know all the tropes and all the things. You found Bitcoin, excuse me, you found Bitcoin around that time in your life, I think, and or a bit later. Was it during or after your teaching, or when was that?
I was teaching from maybe 08 or so through 14, and I found Bitcoin in 17.
Yeah, so Bitcoin changes some fundamental rules and systemic stuff that is kind of a forcing function. It just changes, sort of like you think about the split of, you can hold on and keep not doing good in fiat, or you can graduate and move on. I feel like it's another bit of a easily just step right through the door, folks. It's a way to pick good as opposed to work harder and compete in the bad.
Yeah, it's a catalyst, just like the UFO stuff is a catalyst. We describe Bitcoin as a rabbit hole, right? And we talk about how Bitcoin is everything you don't understand about money, coupled with everything you don't understand about IT and networks, and everything you don't understand about economics. It's a complex of rabbit holes.
Oh yeah.
And again, going back to like the tree of life and the throat chakra, which corresponds to Thoth and gnosis and knowledge, right? It's a catalyst for us to go learn and seek knowledge. And a lot of us fall into Bitcoin because we see the vampiric nature of the fiat legacy system and how much it hurts people at the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic hierarchy. And we want good things for not only ourselves, but especially for the people who are suffering at those lowest levels. And so that's why we're oftentimes trying to orange pill everyone we can who will, you know, hear us out, everyone we can talk to, is because we want to share that understanding and share that love with them. I think a lot of Bitcoiners experience what I call the Bitcoin metanoia. I know I mentioned John Vallis talks about the Bitnoia. He's got it in his private notes, which I've never seen or had access to. But at one point I was on X and I was talking about the Bitcoin metanoia, and I mentioned, you know, I tagged John, and he popped in with a reply like, I call it Bitnoia. Why? That's in my private notes, dude. Like, well, synchronicity. We're on the same page, man. It's like Abraham Maslow developed a hierarchy of needs. It's like a pyramid, right? And at the base level is your basic, you know, attendance to your demands of your biological vulnerabilities, right? You need to eat, you need water, you need shelter, you need warmth, you need rest, right? And then when those needs are sort of met, you can sort of ascend the hierarchy and start worrying about love and accomplishments and your work and your career and your reputation. And as you ascend to the very peak, you get to self-actualization. That seems like an expression of awakening or enlightenment, essentially.
Right.
So I think that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it may be at play with this Bitcoin metanoia, which is not to suggest that one must be wealthy in order to be spiritually wealthy. I mean, that's obviously not the case. Look at how many, you know, clergy members, look at how many monks have taken vows of poverty and are very spiritually rich. But by the same token, those monks, those priests, etc., tend to have their base level needs met by virtue of their profession or their occupation. I'm not sure if those are the right words, but you get what I mean. I mean, they're given donations, like the Buddhist monks, they have their bowl, and that's all they eat is whatever people
only what they're given.
And then you have the collection baskets at like Christian churches and stuff. And so they're operating based on the donations of their communities, but they are having their base needs taken care of, which allows them to focus on higher order things like, you know, spirituality and whatnot. So I think there are definitely ties between Bitcoin and spirituality. And this is why we see so many people turn back to some form of religion or spirituality. And this typically occurs after they've taken the orange pill. And on the subject of the orange pill and the golden rule, which we were talking about, I've noticed that a lot of Bitcoiners have, you know, converged on the best method of orange pilling is being golden rule compliant, right, and meeting the other person where they are at. So if somebody is a military or law enforcement or a hunter or a Second Amendment advocate, maybe they're not so interested in Brandon Quittem's work, the mycelium of money, or the Bitcoin as a pioneering species, but Jason Lowery's soft war is going to be perfect for them. Meanwhile, your eco hippies and your gardeners, your mycologists, your psychonauts who are into mushrooms and stuff, and they're going to be interested in Bitcoin as the mycelium of money or Bitcoin as a pioneer species. So, you know, it's a matter of finding out what makes your orange pill target tick. What are they passionate about? What are they interested in? And then it's your job. This might be where the Buddhist concept of skillful means comes into play, where
livelihood.
Where you take what they are interested in and Bitcoin, and you build that bridge between those two things. That's a golden rule way of orange pilling.
Yeah, the way I used to orange pill and fall into sometimes is this kind of a like, oh, like this is and it can do the opposite. People are like, oh, I'm not too smart. Clearly, you're a genius, and clearly, I'll never understand this. And number go up, right? As number goes down, and it's like, yeah, it takes a certain intellect. I'll draw another parallel separately here later, but uh, people start often with Bitcoin probably in their gnosis chakra, but then it's infectious, and once that sticks, it infects the heart and the spirit, and it starts to unwind. Just to use an analogy, but it changes you. There's I had to when the first time I heard the word, you said it, and I had to look it up. Metanoia, a Greek term meaning a change of mind, signifying a fundamental transformative shift in thinking, perception, and heart, rather than mere remorse, often translated as repentance in Christian theology implies a conversion from a self-centered perspective to a divine one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like what's happening as Bitcoin is giving us that subtle push, and not even just in people, but systemically in it as its own mechanism for money and property, if you will. But it's like an inoculation. We've got a body, a corpus with cancer and organs that are not functioning, organs that are making us sick. And Bitcoin is like healing us. And the fix is in. The fix is in. And so it's sort of like just going to consume and eat up that cancer steadily. And then my other point about that was that your thinking, when I've met people who are capable of the thought processes that you have, and it's not many, not to just not to blow smoke for you, but people who are capable of a lot of these kinds of ideas can kind of peer into a void and have it peer into them, or get really hooked and stuck on a thing, or become feeling like a pariah, or all these various things. And so this same sort of funny meme, you get people that fall into that, but they don't have it sorted out, or they've gotten really excited and have made connections and just start, you have to like rein that in, like, oh my God, I want people to know this stuff. And I've had people that know things and share them, but don't do so really well, or they just are like, okay, well, that's kooky, or you're a kook, or whatever. What you've done is synthesized, catalyzed all of these things that any one of them is a study in its own, but synthesized it in a way that you can communicate it evenly, carefully, where like I mentioned one little thing and you could just be like, oh, here's all this stuff and I'm crazy. But you're very patient and you take care with how you have this kind of just this very conversation, because this could be, we've been here over 3 hours. It could have been 3 days. And but the golden rule applies. You must be thinking of that all the time, like normal fiat conversations. You're at work or you're with family or whatever it is, and you could just be that guy that it's like, don't ask him what he thinks because he's going to go off on something. You manage that very well. So that's a rare trait.
Thank you. And I know we discussed not on the air in the pre-show my articles that I wrote.
Oh yeah. And go ahead.
The first one was Thanksgiving is Bitcoin. The next one was Time is Bitcoin. I was writing them and posting them on loveisbitcoin.com. So I was just following the something is Bitcoin format. And that's how I was naming each article. There's my Medium page. I also sort of posted them there. Each of those articles, for the most part, converged on some kind of a holiday, whether it was a, normie no coiner holiday or a Bitcoin holiday. And my thought was, well, at least for the normie holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's Day, 4th of July in the US, these are super spreader events, right? If we go back to 2020 parlance, right? We can't have our holiday gatherings. It's a super spreader event. Well, super spreader events can, be where ideas go viral, not just sort of illnesses or whatever. And so my thought was, let me take the Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, crazy Pepe Sylvia act, and let me rein that. Let me offer Bitcoiners some talking points that are actually germane to the holiday.
Right.
But like, let me paint some parallels between Thanksgiving and Bitcoin. Let me paint some parallels between the timekeeping conventions of the winter solstice and Christmas and New Year's, right? Because the winter solstice was the original New Year's, and now we have our New Year's, and then Christmas, that was the birthday to Christ, and whether that was the actual birth date or not, it still affected how we keep time, right? AD and BC, like that, we keep time that way. Well, now what do? As Bitcoiners, we use block heights as time and date stamps, right? So Bitcoin is related to time in that way. Bitcoin is related to Thanksgiving and preparedness. Bitcoin is related to love in different ways. Bitcoin is related to freedom. So my goal was to sort of rein in that excitable Charlie character and give people talking points that won't feel out of place during their holiday gatherings, and give them a way to, again, sort of golden rule in a way, orange pill in a way that's, appropriate given the time and place.
It's a hard skill to learn. And so your outlet can be, your writing, and I mean, or your poetry, or just anything that you create. And that is how we, act as a conduit for that energy that's out there. Is it comes to us, or we're studying, we have that innate purpose and drive to create and be, but we got to have an outlet so you can put it out there, and you don't have to do that at Thanksgiving dinner. So you have your Medium writings here. You've got articles on Medium you've written. You also have a group, Flight Club, that you can join. Do you want to speak to this briefly? A collection of like minds that can get together and discuss?
Yeah, Flight Club is a weekly spiritual study group. It started a few years ago, initially on X, then my account got rug pulled. I lost all my spaces where that was. So now I host them on Clubhouse. Eventually, my plan is to host them on, more like a Bitcoiner website like Hive Talk. And then just record them and release them as podcasts. I'm still working on building a website. I'm working on converting the recordings of those study group sessions into podcasts, and plan to release them as podcast episodes. I figured I've got all these books that I've collected. I've been able to read through a percentage of them, but, I bought them all with the intent of reading them all. And, time is limited. So I need to make progress through these things. And my thought was, all right, I'm going to Captain America this. I'm going to fall on the grenade, and I'm going to read these books, in chapter by chapter, chunk by chunk. And I'm going to do it so that other people can function stack in their lives. So they can garden their gardens, they can mow their lawns, they can wash their dishes, they can clean out the cat litter boxes, they can do their taxes, whatever they're doing that's occupying their time. It's just like being in a mechanic shop or whatever, and they got a radio going, right? You can still consume content through your ears while you're getting other things done.
Right.
So I figured, well, I'm going to make progress through these books. I'm going to read them. I'm going to read them out loud, and I'm going to put it out there on the wire, and let anybody who's interested in these type of subjects listen in. And so that's a big part of what we do. One thing we do is we study a logical fallacy every week, because in order to abide the golden rule and love our neighbors as ourselves, it's important that we be receptive to what they have to say. We want to learn their words and learn their ways, and figure out, what's baby and what's bathwater there. But in order to do that, you have to have robust discernment. Otherwise, you might fall for anything, right? You can ignore reality, as Ayn Rand put it, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. So we don't want to fall for nonsense that's out there. We want to have robust discernment. And so we study a logical fallacy every week. And then typically we'll study through some material, maybe a couple of different books to keep things, diverse and interesting. But we also offer commentary on it. And we, in addition to studying those things and offering our commentary on those things, we also gather together in order to share any cool discoveries that we made during the week in between study group sessions. We have our individual seeking processes and we have our group seeking process. So if I discover some cool stuff, in the week between study group A and B, then I'm going to share, my grand marquee headline of this is the cool thing that I figured out over the last week, and everybody can share that stuff. And I think that's what church was originally in the Christian tradition. According to Dolores Cannon, they called it the way. They would gather together, they would meet up, and they'd probably share their sort of discoveries that they found during the week. They'd share moments, interactions with other people that were good or successful in some way. So yeah, it's kind of like church, but not church,
not prescriptive, but still seeking the way. So
yep,
that's awesome. Yeah, good way to connect with people. So you can go to clubhouse.com and search for the Flight Club. Join the group if you're interested in that connection. You can be in this modern, amazing, magical internet world. You can do that from anywhere. You can find on Medium your RedTailHawk. Let's see, RedTailHawk 1923. But anyway, you'll find him on Medium.
And I'm on X now. I'm RedTailHawk 19. 1923 was the date that Medicine Man gave me my name, so that's why 19. That's why 1923. And for anyone interested in the Flight Club sessions and attending them live, we meet on Sundays at noon Eastern time. And yes, we do the crazy, stupid time change whenever the daylight savings thing shifts. So, and if anybody struggles to find it, come find me on X, RedTailHawk 19. I'll be more than happy to direct you, give you links to help you find it. But yeah.
Daylight savings is coming up, and I used to think like, oh, it's for reasons. It was the farmers, right? Or what's the story there? And I had to think about it. I was like, what the fuck do farmers care about? Is it 9 or 10 when it's time to like milk the cows? It's like a way for powers that be to remind you that they even control the hour. So anyway, I get cynical about that, but
no, you're right to. I heard that it had something to do with one of the world wars. I want to say it was World War II or something when it was originally introduced. I forget exactly what the story was there, but yeah, then they just kept doing it.
I remember one. Well, now I put it in the wrong tab, but let me. I just had to search it up, but I remember an early story in grade school about Benjamin Franklin thought about it, and it just made sense to like whatever have hours numbers that translated to daylight, but I mean it changes anyway. So how does it make sense? What does it say? Daylight savings time, aiming to reduce energy consumption for lighting and increase recreational time, originally implemented during World War I to conserve fuel. Anyway. Are we still there? I don't know. I mean, we got AI and things burning enough energy elsewhere as it is. So now let's see. Let's go to your X profile. You can find RedTailHawk on X, RedTailHawk19, part of the Bitcoin Army, and a great follow. Good introduction of yourself on the spaces from time to time, always very interesting. And on Noster, you can find RedTailHawk at nosterplebs.com on Noster. So that's how you can find you in a lot of your background from other podcasts. You've been on a few. So great conversation, obviously, is why people want to hear more and why this was so long, because we have just touched on a number of areas. And I mean, we could just go on, but I want to be respectful of your time. And I guess we could do this again sometime, have another session, something.
That would be awesome. And if anybody's interested in other appearances that are not listed yet on there, I just did one with Stacy on the Bitcoin Nova podcast. And on Friday, I'm doing an episode of Pleb Chain Radio with Avi Burra. And then I've got another one with Vince, Florida Hodl, in mid-March. And in the meantime, I'm doing a series of episodes with Caleb from the Bitcoin Consciousness podcast. We're probably going to do, 10 episodes or something, where I'm just going to lay out all my research in order, go buy the book basically and lay it all out.
Wow. Yeah. Prolific now. I was going to look it up if Bitcoin Nova has you up. I guess not yet, maybe.
We just recorded yesterday, so it'll be out in maybe a week or two.
She does some production, unlike what I do. So you're not there yet, but we'll hear you on, if you search for the Bitcoin Nova podcast, Stacy, the Bitcoin Nova, you'll be in here. So that's awesome. You are getting around, and deservedly so, I would say, because you have a lot of interesting things. And if you're going to have hosts that are pure on Bitcoin, and you can speak to that. And if they deviate like I do, boy, there's a lot more to it too, isn't there?
I forgot another one too. I've done episodes on education, right? With my education background, I've done one of those with Daniel Prince. It was episode 444. I did an episode with him on the pole flip subject. I think that was 514. The baptism one was 562. And then one that's not released yet that I did a few weeks ago with Jake Woodhouse was on education, because he's looking at doing homeschooling. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I'm just searching real quick to see if I can find it. No, I can't. But anyway, wow. Yeah, you could add to your portfolio in your bio list of all the places you've been. Yeah, if you're interested in this stuff, you've got some of it listed on your Noster page here. If you go to, in your bio, there's a number of places where you've been on other pods. I listened to some of that to catch up on things, and we've talked ourselves, but anyway, so links are there. Boy, you can add to that. But for that very reason, I just appreciate you coming on here with me to spend so much time covering so much. You're a wealth of energy and knowledge, and I just really appreciate the time you gave me. It's been really fun.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share my knowledge, my research, my ideas. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to another.
Awesome. We'll do it again sometime. So anyway, yeah, thanks again. We'll let you get to your night. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we will see you next time. Bye.